This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. When I started this show, I wanted it to be unlike any other. I wanted to talk with people about big ideas, but also about themselves, in ways they never had before in public. So far, that's exactly what's happened in every episode. But I couldn't have that kind of conversation by talking to someone on Skype or on the phone. They have to be talking to me face-to-face in person. And that means I have to travel and find recording spaces where I can have intimate conversations like that. All of which is to say, I need your help to keep this show going. Please do me a favor. Go to unregisteredlisteners.com and become a subscriber. This isn't just a contribution. You'll become a member of a private Facebook group where you can talk with me and with guests from the show. You'll also receive access to the episodes that have been archived, which right now include the episodes with Michael Malice, Maggie McNeil, and Camille Foster. We're also rolling out unregistered merchandise, shirts, mugs, stickers, and other items featuring the Unregistered and Renegade University artwork. Subscribers get free or heavily discounted merchandise there. There's much more for subscribers at unregisteredlisteners.com. I hope you can help me keep these remarkable conversations going. There's another way you can participate in conversations with me like the ones on the podcast, and it's happening soon. There are a few tickets left for a special weekend event with me in Salem, Massachusetts on August 5th and 6th. During the weekend, we'll discuss many of the issues that I've talked about on the podcast, including the meaning of the Trump presidency, the current crises in colleges and universities, the politics of race, and the idea and theories that inform my work. And during the weekend, we will record a live episode of Unregistered. You can get all the information for this event and purchase tickets by going to thaddeusrussell.com/courses. It's really nice to be able to say that my guest this week is someone who has changed a lot of people's lives. If you're one of the many thousands of people who listen to the School Sucks podcast, you'll know that Brett Veinotte has helped many kids and their parents free themselves from the American school system. But as you'll hear, it turns out that Brett, while doing that, also freed himself. So I'm in my house in Salem, Oregon with Brett Veinotte, and I just want to tell him a story to start off with.
Please do, yes.
Okay. So my earliest memory of school is first grade. I'm 6 years old. It's LeConte Elementary School in Berkeley, California. This would have been in 1971. My teacher's name was Mrs. Fishleader. And my earliest and only memory of that entire year, and this is true, is of me with two other kids pulling an entire bookcase down onto Mrs. Fishleader's head in protest. Rebellion, really. It wasn't quite a revolution, but clearly there was something going on in that classroom that I didn't like, and we actually did violence to this teacher. That's my first memory of being in school. So it kind of went downhill from there. And here I am today with the head of the School Sucks project, and I met you.
We have to stop for 1 second.
Why?
Your first grade teacher in school was named Miss Fishleader?
Mrs. Be respectful.
Mrs. Fishleader.
She was married to somebody. Mr. Fishleader, I take it.
Fishleader.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I know.
School. Okay.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing. The whole thing's amazing. This is why I'm telling you the story.
All right.
But I wasn't in that school of fish.
Right. No, you weren't.
I'm proud to say. Yeah, no, I hated school, man. I hated it always. I hated it. And I have many, many more stories like that. I was always the bad kid. I was physically thrown into a closet once.
By a teacher?
Yes. I was physically thrown out of a classroom through the door many times. I spent lots of time in assistant principals' offices, the disciplinarian assistant principal. Elementary school, middle school, high school. Always, I was the class clown. I would crack jokes that were completely disruptive. I had no interest in school. I hated it all the way through, from K through 12. So then I met you many years later at this weird convention. I was invited to give a talk at this thing called, what was it called? The Liberty
Forum.
Liberty Forum in New Hampshire.
Where I diagnosed you with oppositional defiant disorder.
Did you?
And wrote you a prescription for Adderall.
Yeah. Finally an expert who understood me.
Right.
So yeah, no, I get invited to give this talk in New Hampshire in February. And I knew it was some libertarian thing, and I barely knew anything about libertarianism, and certainly didn't consider myself one, but they were willing to pay my flight out there. So I went, and I remember it's like the Logan Airport, and the guy picks me up, and he starts talking about this Free State Project. And I said, what's the Free State Project? And he said, that's where you're going. You're going to give a talk to these people. I was like, what the hell is this? So I go there, and it's as I sort of predicted, it's like a whole convention center full of Asperger's cases.
Yeah, it would seem so.
Yeah, except for you. So I come.
Thanks.
So I'm like perusing the book vendors thing, the room where all the booksellers are, and all the nonprofits have their things, pamphlets out. And it's just all weird stuff. And it's reminding me of like old Marxist conventions I used to go to, like I told you earlier, the Socialist Scholars Conference in Manhattan, which is just full of these weird old dudes who seem to live underground and then come out every once in a while to talk to each other about Marxist theory. It reminded me of that same milieu, same types. But then I come across this table with this banner across it, and I'm looking down at it, and it says in big letters, "School Sucks Project." And I remember being just gleeful. I loved it. I just loved the name of it. And I loved your logo, and I grabbed a bunch of stickers. In fact, my son just the other day said, "Oh, you're having that guy Brett Veinotte, the School Sucks Project? Yeah, we used to have all those stickers around the house." And I don't know, there's something about the spirit of the name and what it represents, that just sort of direct, in-your-face rebellion against this thing that's never questioned in our society, Family is never questioned. The military is never questioned. The work ethic is never questioned. And school is really never questioned. We sort of assume deep in our bones, our cultural bones, that it's just a good thing and we got to do it. But so then we sort of hit it off, and we've hung out and done a lot of things together over the last few years. And now we're organizing this event in Salem, Massachusetts. It's coming up in a few weeks, and we'll talk about that. But man, that was exciting to meet you, because I felt like, here's someone who really gets what I went through and what I felt all those years in those horrible boxes they call schools.
Yeah, and it was exciting to meet you too, because you changed our whole world in 2014. You really did. You really shook things up, just like you did at Liberty Forum. You really shook things up in my community. You probably remember that. You interacted with plenty of those people, and I thought it was really, really good, because one of the exciting things, I guess, about embracing libertarianism is that it comes with this kind of moral and intellectual superiority that can make people kind of complacent. And especially if you take that complacency that you have in your mind and then you turn it into a media project where you attract people who cheer you on, that position only hardens, right? And then with that hardened position, it becomes harder to get outside of that and find, I still don't do it enough, to find people outside of that bubble to talk to. So you just, you had good reviews from some mutual friends. You were there to do another podcast. So I said, let's sit down with this guy for a half an hour. And it blew my mind. And then I read your book immediately, and it blew my mind. So you are a really important figure in the history of my show, actually. Wow. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm just remembering what the controversy, the talk I gave. Again, I was new to this world. I didn't know how these people thought. I wasn't totally hip to the ideology. And the first thing I said in this talk, and people can actually see it online, there's a video of it, I started talking about when I got to the hotel that day, I smelled weed as soon as I walked in.
Right.
And I thought that was kind of cool, kind of a rebellious thing, kind of made me think of like, the Bay Area where I grew up, San Francisco in the 1960s and 70s when smoking weed in public was like this, oppositional thing and defiant thing. And I kind of liked it. And so I started talking. I began my talk to these libertarians the next day saying, yeah, you're my kind of people. I like this, and it just fell silent. This did not go over well at all. And I was like, what's wrong, guys? Why don't you think it's great to, these guys are like breaking the law, but in a good way. They're like violating this law that's totally bullshit. That's, trying to control people's personal lives. Don't you support that? And they were like, don't you understand? That was in a hotel. That is private property. That was a violation of Holiday Inn's property rights.
You became like the most polarizing figure in libertarianism without even knowing.
And so it's been 5 years since that happened, and I've thought about this a lot, and I don't know where I stand now. At the time, I just thought these people are fucking crazy, or not crazy, but there's just something. It felt so old man conservative in a way, that you're worried about. It was at Holiday Inn. It was some major corporate chain hotel. It wasn't like
take your pick. Yeah,
it wasn't like some mom and pop B&B or something, And I was like, they're concerned about those property rights. And by the way, we don't have to get too deep into this, but like that hotel is on that piece of land because the state gave it to them, and the state has protected them in all these ways. So it's whatever. But anyway, but it was funny because, I thought they would like this, and they were just, half of them sort of were pissed off at me and remain pissed off at me. And then the other half, and I guess this is your crowd, were sort of just interested and curious or puzzled, but in a good way. Like, who could say such a thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
And wanted to know more.
Even when I talk to my audience today about you, like online, I say, you love/hate him. And that covers pretty much everybody. There isn't much in between.
That's good, I guess, right? That's kind of what you want.
But the hate is a curious hate still.
Yeah, well, that's good. I like curious hate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't mind being hated as long as you keep listening.
Oh yeah. And no one has ever said, I just can't listen to that guy.
I do get, especially lately, a lot of comments like on social media from people who say, God damn it, you pissed me off the other day when you said this thing, or I disagree with you much of the time, but damn it, you make me think.
Yeah.
It's the greatest compliment. I don't care too much whether you agree with me, but I do want you to listen, and I do want you to think harder.
Absolutely.
I want you to think harder. I want everyone to think harder about everything. So that's what I want people to say about me.
I was yesterday was the 4th of July, and I was spending it with my dad, who brought me to the airport. It's hard to believe that was this morning, but brought me to Logan Airport this morning to fly out here. And he said to me yesterday, so Thaddeus Russell, what's his position? What's
shortstop?
I had no idea.
Occasionally second base.
How to build that bridge. So fast.
I just like playing middle infield.
Right.
Turning the double play, I think, is one of the most beautiful things in sports.
Right.
Is that what he meant?
Well, no, but he's like, he's a conservative. He's admittedly naive about certain things. He would say that.
Your dad's a conservative?
Yeah, he is.
I didn't know this.
And how to build the bridge between. He's very open, very easy to talk to, very curious for somebody in his late 60s. But how to build the bridge between him and you in, a 5-minute answer to that question.
Let's do it. Well, I don't know. Maybe he doesn't want to have a bridge, and maybe I don't want to have a bridge.
Sure.
You know? I mean, I'm not a conservative.
No.
And I don't want to become a conservative.
And I'm worried that I am.
You might be. I worry about that too with you.
You've been worried about that for a while, but the last year has gotten really...
I know. You're starting to scare me, but we're going to figure that out right now. No, we are.
Let's do it.
By the end of this show, we're going to know who you are. I mean this.
I don't want to say conservative, but I'm becoming more conservative.
Yeah. I gotcha.
Small c.
Yeah. No, we're going to do that right now. So your dad, he's always been a conservative?
For a while, he called himself a libertarian, but he lost enthusiasm for that, I guess. I mean... very reluctant with Trump, embraced Mitt Romney, reluctant with John McCain. I mean, my whole life, he was a Reagan guy.
Mainstream Republican.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
But, knows there's a lot of, bullshit on both sides, for sure.
In Massachusetts?
He grew up in Salem, Peabody, that area in Massachusetts. So the coastal North Shore, Massachusetts. Traveled around for work, and he moved us up to New Hampshire to a small, suburban bedroom community around 1980 when I was just a baby. But so he saw that as the place. And New Hampshire always had that sort of live free or die spirit that Massachusetts certainly doesn't have.
Yeah, I was going to say, liberal Massachusetts for a conservative can't
But he's
be much
a
fun.
Massachusetts native, sure.
But wait, so you grew up in New Hampshire?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you grew up in Mass.
No, the nucleus of my family is in Massachusetts, but my dad and my mom and me and my two brothers, kind of just that hour buffer away from family.
Oh.
It's good to be a phone call away, not a couple doors down.
But you're certainly not a Bostonian.
No.
Or a what's the valley with all the colleges in it? With all the colleges and the lesbians?
With all the colleges.
Pioneer. What's it called?
Pioneer Valley, Western Mass. That's Western Mass.
You're not that either.
No.
Clearly,
no.
yeah,
No.
okay. Okay, so New Hampshire, that and the sort of border area of Massachusetts.
New England.
That's your home turf.
Exactly.
So being a mainstream Republican isn't so weird.
It's
around there.
you fit in very well.
Okay. So what's your first memory of school?
Crying on a bus.
Wow.
No, they're all crying. Like, they were all traumatic memories. Like, I remember one time, I think I was in nursery school, which isn't public, but I got left there, and I was like, this is a nightmare. I'm left here after I'm supposed to be here.
Wait, what do you mean you were left there? Your parents left you there?
No, I was supposed to, we were in carpool, and the people who were carpooling me home didn't know I was part of their carpool, so they left without me. And I thought I was going to have to spend the night there.
At the public school? Was this a public school?
It was either like nursery or kindergarten.
Oh.
But my first, let's deal with elementary school, because
Okay.
there's lots of crazy memories from kindergarten. It was a wild time. But I remember just crying on the bus when it pulled up to the school and not wanting to get off. And this wonderful, sweet woman, her name was Mrs. Crawford. She was my first grade teacher. She came on the bus and she said, "It's going to be okay. Just come with me. It's going to be okay." And she was so polite, and she held my hand and she walked me to this group of kids, and I was crying. And I think whatever the sort of in that mind at that age, like form of shame there could be, I felt it. But we went into the class, and she was just an incredibly kind woman, very patient woman. And years later, I saw her when I was 30, 31, and I thanked her. I said I really appreciated that. So this is this is different from your first grade.
Well, also, So how do you explain your trajectory then if your first experience with a teacher was so good?
Third grade. Third
grade is when it turned. Because your view of teachers, and this was a public school, correct? Okay. Yeah, is that they're essentially prison guards, isn't it?
Well, that's up to the individual. I don't want to collectivize.
No, I said your view.
No, I mean it's dependent on the individual teacher.
Oh.
Right? They're all different people.
Isn't your analysis that they all serve that function?
They all serve that function, but I think a lot of them ignorantly,
of course.
Especially at that elementary
level.
level.
Of course, they don't think of it that way.
And also, remember, in 1983, 1984, a lot of them probably didn't see the options. If you were passionate about educating young people, where else could you go?
But let's be really clear here, okay?
Okay.
Because I think a lot of people listening may have never thought of this.
Okay.
I don't think I did until pretty recently, which I'm embarrassed about. Public school or schooling is compulsory.
Yes.
In this country. So if you don't send your child to a school of some sort,
someone will eventually come for you.
Yeah. It's illegal, right? And, it's not that you will just get fined. If you don't pay the fine, then they'll come and get you and potentially put you in. You can go to prison if you don't send your child to school, correct?
Or, let's say you send your child to private school. You can do that.
Yep.
But if you don't pay for other people's kids to go to public school, somebody will come for you still.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
So it's compulsory.
Oh, yeah.
And when you go to school as a child, are you allowed to leave the school during the school day? No.
Absolutely not.
So between whatever it is, 7 and 3, whatever the hours are, you have to stay there.
Leaving,
And if you leave, right?
Yeah.
And a state authority, identifies you as a truant,
right.
You get taken back to the place, to the school, right? So how is it not there's summer camp and then there's day camp. Mm-hmm. How is school not day prison?
It is.
Oh, okay.
In many ways.
Well, then,
but I don't want to say that all of these people who are not necessarily culpable in that are bad people.
Yeah. So this is kind of the big question I've had, and I've had some fights, as you might imagine, some hurt feelings, a lot of hurt feelings, because but you and I both know a lot of teachers, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or we know friends of teachers, or, in our world, there are a lot of teachers, public school teachers. So what do we have to say? In fact, this was the very first episode with Michael Malice. He and I talked about this. And
I thought he was really heavy on it.
He went heavy, and I had to pull him back a little bit, because he just started calling them vermin. And I think that's not strategically not the best way to go, even if the analysis is correct. And I'm not even sure the analysis is totally correct there. I do think it's inescapable to conclude that they do serve the function of prison guards. I don't see how you can avoid that conclusion.
Okay, but what's the follow-up there?
Okay, so what do we say to them and about them, school teachers? Do we say that they're prison guards? What do you say?
Well, that's
how do you handle this question? It's very important, right? Because it's a lot of people, and you can just turn them off and alienate them, and then there's nothing accomplished by this.
Oh, the bridges that I've burned, to not knowing how to talk about these things, and bringing to those conversations shame. You should be ashamed of yourself. A lot of that. A lot of that comes with politics, but the left, and I think leftism, conservatism, libertarianism, they all lend themselves to that very, very well. Right? That this is the moral high ground. This is the intellectual high ground. Shame on you for not being here. And that was my approach to a lot of these conversations. So I permanently alienated people from I've had experiences in my family where people were talking about school issues, and I walk in the room and they immediately change the subject. Shh, here he comes.
So conservative family, was your mom a conservative too?
Yeah, she was.
And what did they think of school? In public school?
My dad was the chairman of the school board.
See, here we go.
And he said...
It's bipartisan, people, right? Support for public schooling? Bipartisan.
Well, my dad's idea, this was pretty fanciful, was that teachers' pay should be based on merit, right? Not on some kind of automatic raise schedule.
But they certainly thought there should be public schools.
I think they probably both still do today.
If you're a conservative, don't you need to have public schools? To teach the children how to behave properly and how to think properly. How do we have a national culture, right? A unified national culture.
There has to be some kind of standardization.
We have to have public schools, and we have to have a uniform culture. And the only way to have a uniform culture is to have national schools. Or public schools. So it is fundamentally, definitionally conservative, a conservative institution. Is it not?
I agree with that. But so I think we might be putting my parents in too much of a box. I consider them both to be, I credit them a lot for being, curious, open-minded. They're supportive of what I do. They're curious about what I do. They're not completely immersed in it. They don't listen to it. But I think that a lot of people who have some ability to think freely would be open to alternatives, especially if they don't have kids in the system. I would have a much easier time talking to my 68-year-old father about educational alternatives than I would with my 35-year-old brother who sends his kids to public school. It would be an easier conversation to have with. In this case, you wouldn't think so, but an older person.
I'm just thinking about the shift among conservatives on this issue, right? Because they've moved towards school choice.
Absolutely.
And to some extent, privatization, maybe. And I think they're not being good conservatives.
Because it's kind of turning it into the Wild West of you're not going to be able to standardize culture?
Yeah. How do we teach people how to be Americans if we let them educate themselves? If we let them choose their education, school choice is choice of education.
Well, see, I read that totally differently. I would think that true conservatives would see that as a function of the family and the community. And those are actually things that I agree. You know, like today, I know this is kind of trite, but we live in this world where people don't have to know each other. They don't have to talk to each other. Fighting is more entertaining than actually having some kind of community connection. You know, when I grew up, my dad's a conservative in a town that's pretty mixed politically, right? He's chairman of the school board. He's trying to have teachers, you know, pay based on their merit. So like my 4th grade teacher, who still teaches, my nephew is about to have him as a teacher next year.
Wow.
Yeah. Amazing guy. Read all my best memories of elementary school.
Tenure, baby.
Right, aside from sweet Mrs. Crawford, all my best elementary school memories are this guy.
What's his name?
Archie Schroeder.
Archie Schroeder.
Yeah.
Mr. Schroeder.
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Schroeder. And we built a yurt. He took us outside all the time.
Oh, he's that teacher.
Okay, so
he's the hippie teacher.
He was kind of a hippie.
He's the one hippie teacher we all had.
But what was he? 4th grade. So I'm 10 years old. Where do 10-year-old boys need to be? In desks? Like you were being very fantastical when you were talking about kids leaving school. How about getting out of a desk without permission?
Right.
That's not an option.
No.
How about peeing without permission?
All 10-year-old boys should definitely be in rooms, indoors, at desks all day long.
So
everyone knows that. That's the healthiest thing for them.
One of the greatest things about Mr. Schroeder, having Mr. Schroeder in like 1987, was the year before I had Mrs. Hartford. She was 150. She was ancient, this woman. She had been there. She had had people in the class. She had had their grandparents. I'm not even kidding. She had one girl's grandmother as a student. All we did was cursive. 3rd grade. There's no light at the end of the tunnel, man, in 3rd grade. Cursive in a desk. That is not acceptable behavior. You're being yelled at. Teased with candy, carrots and sticks. It was awful. It was awful. So then to have this literal breath of fresh air in 4th grade, to build a yurt, to walk around in the woods, to have a man read you The Hobbit with all the voices.
Wow.
It was like there's hope.
Mr. Schroeder.
Yeah, absolutely. Down. Absolutely. Yeah.
Do you mind if I go back to the theory?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
No, I'm just rethinking this conservatism thing. You know, so you said that conservatives would want the family and the community to educate the children. Okay, so that makes sense to me in the classical conservative sense, the Edmund Burkean sense, right? Who was hostile to the nation state.
Yeah,
this is what it's about. So Burke saw the French establishing this modern nation state and trying to make everyone uniform, establishing a uniform culture. And one of the ways in which they were going to do it was through a public education system, right? That's where this idea was sort of invented, was in France during the Revolution. And of course, it was taken up in Prussia.
The standardization and homogenization.
And the transmission of values, right? That serve the nation state.
Well, this is one of the reasons why they thought there were Frenchmen like Victor Cousin, and then people from Britain and people from America like Horace Mann, of course, who went over. And it wasn't, I've talked about this on my show like it was some kind of dark conspiracy, but.
Oh, no, it was all out in front. I mean, they were all public about everything they said.
They looked around Europe at these countries, these cultures that were more established, and they said, what are they doing right? Or if the country was an industrial competitor, what do they do that we don't do? What can we learn from them? And in Central Europe, it was the school. It was the Volksschule, the people's school. There were higher levels of school for the managers and the masters of society. But Horace Mann went over there and he looked at it and he saw how successful it had been just in a couple generations at that point of inculcating obedience to the ruling class and to this nationalist idea. They would have people just willingly march into gunfire for the sake of the state. And Horace Mann said, we can bring that here and use it for good stuff, but it will work. That kind of rigidity will work to standardize this. We've got freed slaves, we've got immigrants coming in. We can use this as he wouldn't have said we could use this as a mold, but that was the idea. And that was the original impulse behind the schools. It had many forms.
Horace Mann was essentially the inventor of the American public school system.
The
father of it. And he said publicly, he was unashamed, he said, We should use schools to train our citizens to be industrial workers, to be good workers in factories, because this is the invention of the factory system as well at this time in the 19th century. So imagine being in a box all day long with an assembly line, and a conveyor belt. That requires a breaking of the human spirit in some ways, and he understood that.
Right.
So it served capitalist purposes as well.
Yeah.
But he also did say, you're right, he also did say, we're going to be fighting some more wars, most likely. We're going to need to have soldiers. And what better way to create soldiers than to have a standardized system of education? So, you know what Horace Mann also did right around that time? He founded a college in Ohio called Antioch College,
Right.
which is the college that I went to. And there is to this day a statue of Horace Mann right in the middle of the campus with his great, the quote from him in which he said, "Be ashamed to die until you have won some great victory for humanity." And we, all these hippies and punk rockers and anarchists at Antioch when I was there in the 1980s, thought that was awesome. And we never once even thought there was anything to ask about Horace Mann and his history and his legacy. If we had spent 1 minute studying the history of Horace Mann and what he stood for and what he did, what he accomplished, we probably would have torn that statue down.
Sure. Absolutely.
Back to conservatism.
Can we just, even if this creates a tangent, I'd just be interested in smashing two ideas into each other with you. So we look at there's this, in the latter half of the 19th century, we see school come in as in an effort to standardize the American population, right? And we say, that's evil, or people have certainly said that's evil. But then, if we took a page from Renegade, right, where you're telling stories, I'm embellishing this a little bit, but I'm sure stranger things happened. You have a bunch of Irish immigrants that you bring in to build a bridge, and instead of working on building the bridge, they spend the day getting drunk and throwing bottles at each other. Now, if you're in public works, or you're some kind of industrialist private bridge builder, you say, fuck, we can't do this Monday through Friday, Yeah. So there is, it's not just an evil plot, right? There was the satisfaction of some kind of need that the managers, or the people who were needing some kind of stability in society, in a quickly destabilizing society, right? So one of the exercises that I've just tried to do on my show is humanize these people a little bit.
Yep.
Humanize both sides. But the harder side to humanize is, the people like Mann and his crew who brought the Prussian schools here, and then the second wave, the reformers who saw the schools as having this socializing function, that the schools could be a new mold for their vision of society.
Yep.
John Dewey.
Yep.
But what they were looking out at from, sure, they're ivory towers, but what they were looking out at through between 1860 and 1930 was probably in many cases quite terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, so what they said they wanted was a well-ordered society. So who doesn't want that?
Who doesn't?
Yeah, well, let's think a little harder, though. So what did that look like? And here's what they said, and this is what they said, and you know this. They wanted a society that functioned like a factory. They said this.
Absolutely.
If you read Dewey, you read the Progressives, you read the Education Reformers, you read Horace Mann, they wanted the factory to be replicated writ large.
Indeed.
Yeah, and so... that's their well-ordered society. Is that evil? I think moral claims are just lazy and non-intellectual. It's not an argument. So I would never say it's evil or bad or immoral in any way. It's just not an argument. It's just not the society I want to live in.
I agree.
Was it a plot? No, because they made all these things public. They said these things from the get-go. They were never ashamed. They never tried to hide this. This is what they said. They said, we want to make society into a factory. We want to train workers and soldiers.
Well, as a historian, let me ask you this question. What did it mean to be public 100 years ago, right? Because these things are public today. We can go to a library. We can find these books. But
good point.
People like Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski were writing things into the 80s that they thought, they were publishing books that they thought most people would just never read.
Yeah. How many Irish immigrants read John Dewey?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sure, that's true. But again, they weren't... there was no attempt to hide any of this stuff.
Sure.
But they were being as upfront as they could be about it. So
Right.
conspiracy, no. I mean, I would call it an open conspiracy.
Okay, yeah.
It was mostly elites talking to each other,
Right.
About how to organize society and what to do to all of these people, or to do with all of these people, the immigrants and the blacks and all these, weirdos in the cities at the time. So no, not an evil plot. Now, here, I guess maybe this is the other question you were getting to. Could we have built all those bridges and buildings and stuff that we like without this, without a school system that was compulsory, without a school system that trained people to be workers? What do you think?
I think we could have, but there would have had to have been a much different... there's this question of how, right?
Yeah. So, immediately when I think about that question, I think about tech these days.
Sure.
And if you think about the great innovators, Steve Jobs, Zuckerberg, Gates, they were dropouts, at least from college.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's hard to say that Steve Jobs thought of the Macintosh computer or the iPhone in school, that school gave him those ideas, or there's anything from his schooling that produced those revolutionary ideas.
Unlikely.
I think that's true for Gates and Zuckerberg too.
Right.
So, the counter argument from my side, I think from your side, is that school, in that sense, squashes creativity.
Well, sure, and that would serve the purpose that it was set up with, right? That to standardize people, to strip out autonomy, individuality, and ultimately humanity, paving the way by the time you get to the 20th century for the Frederick Taylors of the world.
My point is that it's bad for capitalism.
Ultimately, yeah.
Right? Because capitalism needs innovation.
Well, that was what I balked at there, because
and creativity.
It's like, how do you build these bridges?
You know what else capitalism needs? It needs desire for bad stuff, for the stuff they don't teach in schools. Sure. Certainly, our capitalism for more than 100 years has needed that. It's needed us to want things that are sexual. It's needed us to want to get drunk. It's needed us to want to go to the movies and to go to Coney Island and to listen to rock and roll, right? Mm-hmm. Talk about businesses that have been successful in American capitalism. The cornerstone of American capitalism in some ways has been that, right? The consumer culture. All the profit that's been generated from those desires, right? Those are the desires that are attacked frontally in school every day, all day long.
Right. So this is like thank the porn industry for your DVD player
well,
kind of
true,
stuff.
Though.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Yeah.
And here's another thing. Horace Mann and John Dewey, essentially the inventors of the public school system in this country,
We're not capitalists. Right.
They were anti-capitalist.
Yep.
Explicitly, clearly, and they hated capitalism. And you know what they hated most about it? They hated the fact that capitalism satisfied these base desires among the working class.
Yep.
They wanted the working class, and this is why they were interested in high art and bringing high art to the masses. They wanted the working class, those immigrants and those blacks, those factory workers, to read Shakespeare and to look at Rembrandt. They didn't want them going to Coney Island and flirting with women and riding those rides and getting drunk.
No, it opened that door to all of this inhibition. Yeah, that completely breaks down.
So here's my argument, man.
That society
that I'm building.
Yep.
I think we would have more stuff and better stuff if it weren't for the public school system.
I ultimately agree.
Oh, good.
I'm wondering, like, what kind of foresight would have been needed to understand that. In the drunk Irishmen throwing bottles at each other instead of building the bridge days, I mean, it's a thought experiment, but today we agree that would and if we could over the next decade or two phase out the public school system,
Jesus.
Wouldn't
that be beautiful?
But I find myself, I do. I find myself second guessing that now. Like 5 years ago, I believed in that idea so much that the school was just stopping innovation. But how much momentum against, everybody embracing these, entrepreneurial or these exploratory, inventive qualities? How much momentum has school and society built against that now?
Yeah. So if they're prisons, and if we raise the prisons to the ground, I think that's a lyric from a song, and let all those children go free, it's a beautiful thought to me. But the second thought I have is a little bit scary.
Right.
Just imagine that. What would happen with those kids?
Well, we'd have to...
Right.
I think I could do better. Like if you said, "This is the school that we're letting out."
You mean being specific?
Yeah.
So okay. I know that gets dangerous, but if it's Beverly Hills High School,
right, that
we're eliminating and freeing all the kids who go there, all right, maybe a little less scary, but still, even there, I mean, there's 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds. They tend to wild out no matter where they're from, no matter what class they belong to, etc.
If all of a sudden, I mean, this is the problem too. This is the kind of the upsetting thing is that you're going to go through such a decompression period, right? If you suddenly gave all these people who are kept captives in this way, 35 hours a week, if you suddenly gave them complete freedom,
right,
it would, unfortunately, it would be ugly. And it would be like, if you were able to do that in this, hypothetical scenario, you might have a demand shortly after for an even more, lock and key type system to replace it.
Well, yeah, I mean, so there's going to be a market though. So I'm wondering if market forces might take care of this in a good way.
I should probably reveal to your audience at this point that from the very beginning of my show 8 years ago, I said I honestly do not care what happens to the public school system.
Oh,
and I don't want to feel increasingly small and powerless, thinking that I could affect some kind of change in it.
So what do you want to do?
I want to free as many people as possible from it. My show is really about individual liberty. How many people can why would I take on the public school system, that bureaucracy and teachers unions and all of these people who are going to believe in it no matter what, because they don't want to believe somebody got over on them because they graduated from public school, or they don't want to believe someone's getting over on them currently because they send their kids there. I want to find people, this is a niche. I want to find people who this message resonates with them. And they say, maybe I could do something. And I have somebody who works with me right now who said school sucks is the reason my kids don't go to school, And I think when we first I certainly did. When I first started to get into these ideas, I wanted to have some kind of, grandiose impact on the world. But I'm trying to do a service, I'm trying to convince people that there's a better place for their kids to be, and once they understand that, talk about what real education is.
You want to help. So, you want to help the runaways.
I want to give people examples of what education looks like.
Yeah.
Right. And that school is not education.
You want to help people escape.
I do.
Yeah.
I do. But I want to give them the tools. Once they buy into that idea of escaping, I want to give them the tools. I want to give them some assurance that there are opportunities.
So be specific. What do you mean? How do you help people leave that system?
How do I help people think about leaving it? Or I'm not actually providing a service where taking people through the process of exiting the school.
No, what are the ideas that are useful for these people in their escape?
Well, first of all, understanding what school is.
Okay.
Right? And understanding the difference between school and education, and understanding, it takes a long time to explain why school is not education.
Try it.
School is
what's the difference?
School is training. School is conditioning. School is, that standardization of society that we've been talking about. It takes people's individuality away. It takes people's autonomy away. That's why the show is called School Sucks. I thought it was a clever, name for marketing purposes. And kids said it to me all the time when I was a teacher. But when I named the show that, I had nieces and nephews who were 4, 5, 6 years old, right? And I was working with kids who are 16 and 17 years old. Now, if you think about the physical change, the change in brain, the change in opportunities, when you're that age, you could drive a car, you can work, you can have sex, your life should fucking rule, right? And when you're 5 or 6, life, how, what can you even do? So, but the difference I saw between the two kids is that these young kids, 4, 5, 6 years old, they were curious, they believed in themselves, they were optimistic, They wanted to like assert themselves. They had like all these natural gifts that they had they were ready to learn. And then I looked at kids on the other side of that system, the other side of those 12 years, and they were like schlubs, you know? They were bored by everything, couldn't even look you in the eye to talk to you, you know? A 5-year-old, a 5-year-old boy, like let's just think about the size difference, right? I could kick any 5-year-old boy's ass, right? But a 5-year-old boy comes running up to me and he goes, "Hey, guess what? Look at this. Look what I can do. What do you know about this?" Right? And then contrast that to some 17-year-old kid, 6'3", 6'4", football player that I'm tutoring, talks to me with his head down, won't even look at me.
Yep.
Like it's just weird, right? It's weird. And school was sucking all of that stuff out of those kids. The curiosity, the creativity, the individuality, the optimism.
That's what school sucks.
That's what school sucks is. But it's also this other thing that we're talking about too. The second meaning of school sucks is it sucks all of the money that is sunk into the public schools. And like, I've learned from some conversations I had recently about school choice, like 4/5 of it is administrative costs. Just paying, I think the number I saw was $500,000 a year cost of an average classroom. That might just be in New Hampshire, right? Teacher makes what, 60? Maybe with benefits it's 80. The cost of maintaining the building, that's $400,000 unaccounted for.
Quick statistical interjection.
Sure.
I believe this is true. That since the 1970s, early 1970s, funding for public schools in the United States has gone steadily upward, and test scores have remained flat.
Oh, it's an X.
Yep.
If you line the two graphs up, funding goes up.
Yep.
Like straight up across a diagonal across a square graph, and test scores are
the same as they were in 1975.
Well, test scores are flat, but then you can see other scores like specific reading scores, where the graph, if you superimpose one graph over the other, it actually makes an X. As costs go up, scores go down. Yeah.
Anyway, the point being that the left's answer to all this is, we just need to fund the schools better. And they'll all be better.
Yeah.
And that's all they say. And they've been saying that for decades, right? And evidence just isn't there. Although then they would point to Europe and they would say, well, look at the Finnish schools.
Everybody points to Europe.
Look at the Norwegian schools. They're awesome. Yeah, I guess. I don't know. But here's the thing about those cultures and those countries is that there's a lot of uniformity already. So they don't have to break their horses nearly as violently as we do to make them uniform.
Their economic system creates a lot of uniformity.
Sure.
And also, a lot of softness, dependence.
Yeah, right. They're already institutionalized before they're in that institution. Your differentiation between school and education made me think of the word institution. School is an institution. Right?
Yeah. And education is an exploration.
And its purpose, one of its purposes, and even I'd say its proponents would agree with this, is to train people to be parts of institutions.
Yeah.
Whether it's a corporation or it's the United States Army.
Yeah.
Right? It's to train you, a child, to be how to be a part of an institution, part of a larger thing.
Right.
An organization. Right? If that's what socialization is in this sense, that's what they're doing in schools, right?
Absolutely.
Whereas education, at least in your conception of it, it sounds like the asking of questions and the exploration of them. Is that right?
Absolutely.
It's more intellectual. It is intellectual. It's an intellectual enterprise.
Yeah, but it's also creative. It's exploratory. It's all of those things that school isn't.
Yeah.
And if you just look at how school was continuously refit for different purposes since its inception 150 years ago.
Brett, we don't have time to explore in the woods. We don't have time for this.
That's what they told us in fifth.
Well,
after we wanted to go outside because of Mr. Schroeder.
So first of all, there's Indians out there, right?
Okay.
And if we just let our kids wander around in the woods, they're not going to be able to help us when the Indians come with their spears and then their guns, right? And try to steal our stuff and take our women. Well, that was exactly the argument, right? And then it was the Mexicans, and then it was the South, and then it was the Filipinos, and then it was the Germans and the Huns, and then it was the Japanese, and on, right?
Right.
So if we just let our kids explore their childhood, right?
Yeah.
Explore nature, think about the big questions, we're not going to be able to protect ourselves, and we're not going to be able to produce anything.
Weren't we like in like a nice window though between like scary enemies? Like we're different. You're 12 years older than me, but we're in this window where I could be 6 years old, and I mean I lived in a nice safe place, but I could say, "Mom, going for a bike ride. I don't know. I'll be back whenever." And she'd be like, "All right, have fun." I would go. I'd walk around in the woods by myself. This was the 80s, and then the kidnappers came.
Yes, the kidnappers. I know. So
I don't know if you had something like that from your youth, but we had pretty free reign until the kidnappers showed up in the windowless vans.
I know, it's true. So you never see children on the streets anymore. It's quite amazing.
Now it's almost illegal.
Yeah. Well, I'm just sure that everyone, or a lot of people are thinking right now, well, what if we did let children explore the world the way you're talking about, let them be just free thinking intellectuals, and that's what education would be. I bet a lot of people are still worried, and even in me, I'm wondering, would we have nice things?
Well, I don't like.
Would we be speaking German or Russian now if we had education like that, right? That's been the argument all along.
We'd all be driving German and Japanese cars.
So I think we did a pretty decent job with the innovation piece of it. I think we would actually have a better capitalism if we didn't have public education. But we wouldn't have soldiers.
I don't know how to talk about this on such a massive scale.
Okay.
All I want to see is a vanguard of people who are willing to do it.
Yeah.
People who are and the unschooling community is starting to produce this. I mean,
so what is that, first of all?
Where people let their children learn like adults like us learn. You interested in something? Go DIY it. Go explore with it.
But is that legal? How do they do that? How do they manage the state and its requirements?
It depends on what state you live in. Some states are more friendly than others, right? Like it would be now. There's countries where it's illegal.
How is this different than homeschooling?
You could probably run run an unschooling household. You could probably facilitate an unschooling household under the banner of homeschooling, and depending on the state you live in, you might have to get. Clever with what you're sort of submitting. There's probably going to be somebody who wants you to submit something either quarterly or biannually. I did it with a boy in New Hampshire. I had to report to the school district. School district paid me to work with him as an academic tutor.
Oh.
And he was obsessed with ancient aliens. So I had to create learning opportunities out of ancient aliens.
What do you mean ancient aliens?
Oh, you don't know about ancient aliens?
See, this is the other concern people have, right? If we let the parents decide how their children are educated, they're going to be learning stuff that isn't real.
Yeah, they're going to be learning stuff that's but what
this explains 9/11 truthers and the Flat Earth Society and the massive popularity of the Alex Jones show. Is that we have a lot of people who teach their children, who are their children's teachers, who themselves are ignoramuses, who think they are experts. And look what we got for that. We got a president who doesn't even know where Syria is on a map.
Well, those people went to public school, right? All those people who can't think critically, who don't have intellectual self-defense.
Oh, you think those are actually products of the public school
system?
They're
products of the public school system.
You think Alex Jones's fans are products of the public school system?
I think mostly. I think, come on. What do you think that's the grown-up homeschool population
Probably.
of the country?
Probably. Well, there's also the concern about, because homeschooling did start, didn't it, mostly as a Christian movement? Wasn't it Christian parents who wanted to
There's certainly a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of sympathy for,
and so a lot
of fear of the public school indoctrination against Christian values.
Right.
Yeah. Especially since like the 1960s.
And that's kind of been changing lately, though, right?
It's broadening. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think it's a long road to hoe. I think it's gonna. I don't think we're gonna see it in our lifetime. I would like to, but anyway, you're saying your purpose is to help the runaways, the refugees,
I think
the
about
escapees
it as a service.
Yeah.
No, I mean, like, I'm not going to learn the laws for all 50 states. Here's how you pull your kid out of school. But I want to, get people excited about the possibility of, real learning, real education, freedom.
Okay, but
for young people.
But I was getting to there's another problem there.
Okay,
and this is the problem that I have. So a lot of people have heard me talk about this, but my son has been in public schools since he was in kindergarten.
Sure.
He's now in 11th grade. He's pretty much hated all of it.
Right.
I've hated what I've seen. I think he's learned almost nothing. Mm-hmm. It breaks my heart every day to send him there. And then people say to me, oh, well, Thad, why don't you just homeschool him? And I say to them, yeah, who's going to do that? It's work. It's work. It's a lot of work to be a teacher. And that's what homeschooling usually is, isn't it? It's one or both of the parents being teachers. No? Well,
no. I mean, that's what. If you want to, is that what homeschooling usually is? That's certainly nothing I'm promoting.
Brett, tell me right now, how do I do this? I would love to liberate my son. Honestly, how do I do this without doing all the work?
What I would say to you, if this was a real situation and you were
it is
really
a real situation.
Okay, I would say maybe you should ask yourself if you still have somewhat of a schooled mindset yourself. Why does your son, who's 14 years old, who can cook meals like you would get in how many stars do restaurants have? 4?
3 in Michelin. Michelin is 3 stars. Yeah,
isn't there 4?
And Michelin is the big one in
hotels
France.
Are 5.
Yeah, no.
Restaurants are 4.
Trust
okay,
me. A 3-star restaurant's the best.
So
restaurant.
3. Okay,
yeah.
So he can cook meals like you would get in a 3-star Michelin restaurant.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he can.
What? Now he does this unsupervised.
Yes.
Okay.
All on his own.
So what does he need you for at this point in his life? It's great that you're his dad and you're, intellectually curious and you're a smart guy who encourages him to learn and encourages him to follow his passions. What does he need you for as a teacher?
Oh.
Right?
Oh, I see what you're saying here. You're telling me, and maybe you're telling everybody, just let your kids do whatever they want.
At 14?
Yeah.
I think there's you have to feel these things out. But I think your son, if he's proven himself in these capacities, then does he need supervision? Does he need some kind of guy? Is there something that he needs to learn that school provides that you're worried that he won't get at this point if he's not there?
So, Brett, I love you. And I love School Sucks Project. But let me tell you a story about my son. My son, you're right, taught himself how to cook a world-class meal.
Yeah.
Last year when he was 14. He devoted almost all of his time to studying cookbooks, to studying chefs, to studying restaurants, to studying food, to teaching himself all of the most sophisticated techniques in the culinary world. He became an expert and a top-notch chef, almost entirely self-taught when he was 14. True. He ran his own pop-up restaurant. He served exquisite 11-course meals to adults and charged them a lot of money, and they paid for it.
Right.
Okay. That was last year. Now he's 15. For the last year, he has given up cooking. He's no longer interested in it. He is interested almost exclusively in hip-hop, which is fine.
Okay.
And shoes.
Kids in their shoes. Yeah.
Okay. He doesn't care anymore about cooking and food. He doesn't do it anymore. And what he does is he listens to all the hip hop that's produced now, and he thinks about and studies Air Jordans. So he's an expert on contemporary hip hop and sneakers. He spends a lot of time listening to music, and he also watches a lot of videos. He'll spend all day, in fact, watching videos. In fact, yesterday, he spent 12 hours watching television. So, if I were just to let him do what he wants to do, I think that's what he would do. He wouldn't be cooking these amazing meals.
For how long? How long do you think he'd do that for?
I don't know, man. But I think that's what you're up against as well, is people observing especially their teenagers, and what they tend to gravitate toward is sort of this hibernation. And they're on screens, they're on their phones all the time, they're watching videos about who knows. but they ain't learning nothing that we value. So,
Well, who's to decide what has value?
There you go. That's good. Okay, not bad. But
so what do we have to say? Okay, well, Toby is not on a track to make $120,000 a year as a chef anymore. So now we need an intervention.
Good point. Yeah,
let's see where this goes. He's 15 years old. It doesn't have to go anywhere. It's a path he's walking down.
That's kind of that's what I hold on to.
And I would think that there would be, after he has been, captive for what at this point. What is he, sophomore in high school?
10 years now, yeah.
10 years in public
10
school.
years of 10 years in captivity.
So he's still going to school, right?
Yeah.
Day in and day out.
Yeah.
So what the hell would I be doing? Do you want to know what I was doing when I was 15 or 16 years old after school?
Right. What?
I was just getting baked out of my wits.
Were you? Driving
around in a Dodge Colt to the mall and playing arcade games.
I was doing something really, really productive and sophisticated. I was playing Stratomatic baseball by myself. That's how lame I was. Stratomatic baseball. It's like a board game with statistics based on real baseball players.
That sounds awesome.
And
that sounds like something I'd get into right now.
I'd roll dice and then I'd play both teams because I didn't have any friends. All day long, man. That's what I did when I was 15. So yeah, no, I know. I think you're right. An argument has been made that really parenting and schooling don't really matter much in terms of a person's trajectory. That you kind of end up where you're going to end up regardless of what your parents do or what your teachers do.
Wait a minute.
What?
You're not making a...
No, not that it's predetermined.
Okay.
But that they will whatever determines where they go is sort of autonomous or independent of these other things of parenting and schooling. I think some studies have been done. I think
there's a book called The Nurture Assumption.
There's another book. I forget who wrote it, but anyway, who recently makes this argument that I don't know. There's some evidence to suggest that those things have very little effect on what one does in one's life and where one ends up.
I think that it's hard to believe.
Just let the kids go. Raise the prisons to the ground.
But it's hard. But see, that's the trick, right? When they've already had so much of it. And I do think that it has how could it not have an impact?
You know what? That argument, that's exactly the argument that was made against the abolition of slavery.
It's a total appeal to ignorance that I just made.
People said, wait, we can't let those people go free. They've been in bondage their whole lives. They know nothing but slavery. They know nothing but dependence on others. They can't be free. They don't know how to be free. So we need this thing called Reconstruction. Mm-hmm. And we need this thing in Reconstruction called schools. And we're going to invent this agency called the Freedmen's Bureau. And one of the major purposes is to teach the ex-slaves how to be Americans and how to be workers and how to be good citizens.
Right.
Freedmen's Bureau had 2,000 schools all across the South. Most slaves went through them. This was the training ground. And guess what? This was one of the ways and one of the origins of the modern public school system. Mm-hmm. Horace Mann and company loved this. They were abolitionists, and they said, "Oh, we have an answer to that problem of them, being too free." When they've been enslaved, we're gonna teach them. We're gonna put them in our schools and train them. We're gonna institutionalize them. That was what was done with the slaves. So as you're talking about, our school children now and freeing these people who have been in bondage their whole lives and worrying about that, I think about the slaves. Why couldn't we just let them go free?
Well, this is why I really don't spend a lot of time in this area, because you fall into these traps that I'm in right now. Like I said, this goes back to me not caring what happens to
what would it look like? Like, I'm just thinking about literally my neighborhood right now. If there were no schools, would the kids just be roaming around the streets and getting in people's backyards and doing stuff and, breaking into people's houses and throwing eggs at cars and things that we did when we were kids, but much more of it because they have all this time?
These are impossible questions to answer.
So you're not worried about that. You're not taking a structural reform point of view.
I don't care about that. I don't think about that. I don't expect the system to change in my life. As long as the state exists, the school will be its goose that lays the golden eggs of obedience and conformity and standardization.
You just want as many people as possible to run away from it, to establish their own independent system.
If that's right for them.
For them, yeah. Okay.
Right.
Fair enough. So did you hate school the whole time?
Yes. I did.
All the time, except for
Schroeder and Crawford.
Yeah.
And then there was like in high school there was a newspaper class. That was pretty awesome.
Oh, me too. I like that too.
Yeah,
and I
became
really
like that.
I don't think anybody knows this. I was the editor of the Berkeley High School newspaper my senior year in high school.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, and I like that a lot, but otherwise I hated all of it. So, conservative Republican family, hated school. What did your dad do for a living?
That's a really interesting question. When my dad, through most of my childhood, my dad ran a company that made like multicolor, multi-texture paint for commercial purposes. And he was like a world leader in this industry. And he sold the company around the mid-'80s. And he was about my age. And he could have retired.
Wow.
And instead, I'm just remembering the basics of the stories, but he decided to go forward with another entrepreneurial venture, a company that made printed circuit boards that was distressed, and he decided to buy it. So at this time I was maybe 12, 13 years old. And the company bankrupted him. So this was like college savings, all the money we had. So I remember this period of like living in this big, giant, beautiful house, and there's like hardly any food.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, like really, I remember this was like a really stressful time for him, for my mother. It was kind of like a breaking point or a visible breaking point for them in their marriage. When things were very comfortable, I think it was easier to overlook problems.
So you were quite wealthy, and this was around when you were, what, 15 or so?
I was probably 12, 13 years old.
And then all of a sudden, there's almost no food in the house?
Not like we were starving, but I'm saying, like, imagine, this is just the best visual I can create for the audience, 25 years later, is like, imagine this big beautiful house and just coming home and there's like hardly anything to eat in it.
Yeah, right.
Like there were days like that. It wasn't like CPS needed to be called, obviously, but it was it was inconsistent. And I think what I'm trying to demonstrate there is just this sudden switch from a lifestyle of having everything we wanted to realizing that, and in many ways, my dad pushed through this and made it look the best he could. And I think that stressed him out even more, because he had this standard of living to maintain. I had brothers who were, when I was 12, I had a brother who was 7. So like, he's not expecting like Santa Claus to just not come with the big bounty anymore, because my dad's job took a turn for the worse.
Do you remember your dad being stressed out a lot? Is that your memory of him?
I remember around that time, yeah. And I think he would say that he was kind of anxious about... I remember like when I was little, I was the oldest, so he was very anxious about me walking around and knocking into things and, safety.
So he was generally anxious?
In his own way, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's my worst fear. That my son will see me that way.
Do you think he ever has?
Oh, yeah. Because I'm anxious a lot.
Well, how does that manifest for you?
Stressed out a lot. Oh, manifests in all sorts of ways. But that's what makes me saddest of all, is to think that he might see me that way and think of me that way. And then, of course, it's this horrible loop, right? Where I'm anxious about being anxious. And, not projecting anxiety. And then, of course, it just makes me more anxious. Capitalism is a system of anxiety, too. It produces a lot of good stuff. But we know this, that the 1% changes all the time. People go in and out of the 1% all the time, just like your dad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thomas Sowell, I think, has done this work, in fact. There's just tremendous volatility and dynamism. People think there's this established ruling class that's always the rich. It's not true at all. There's all sorts. People go in and out of being wealthy and poor their whole lives. And in fact, that's been my life. Right now, we're sitting in a really nice house. But 5 years ago, I was stealing stuff to put food on the table.
Right.
And 5 years from now, I have no idea where I'll be. You know, and as a child, my mother was poor and my father was solidly middle class.
Right.
And I would go back and forth between those two worlds. So, you know, I've been poor, I've been rich, I've been middle class. I've been in private jets because I married into a very wealthy family. Mm-hmm. And then when I left that family, I was on welfare.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's capitalism. And that creates unbelievable anxiety, especially for men and especially for the heads of households. Right?
Sure.
Like your dad. So I can imagine, I'm just immediately sort of sympathetic with him, you know, and I'm sort of projecting maybe, but I bet you our experiences were somewhat similar, at least in that way. I can just imagine him, what it was like walking around in that house and thinking, I'm a failure. Because it's not just that you can't provide anymore. Mm-hmm. There's all this cultural baggage too, all these expectations that you're supposed to provide for your family. You're supposed to be a success. And if you're not a success, and worst of all, he was a success, and then he lost all or most of it.
Yeah, and he would tell me stories like years later, I think when I started having problems with anxiety. Like one night I was just like, I remember, I don't remember, I did acid. I was in high school, right? And wound up being alone, had a really bad time.
Yeah, I did mushrooms when I was 18, and it was just about the worst thing you could do when you have a lot of anxiety is hallucinogens.
But I didn't know what it was. I think before this period in my life, the anxious feelings that I had were they would manifest very emotionally. Mm-hmm. Right? I'm scared. And I would just say things like, as a little kid, I'm scared. I don't like this. I don't want to go there. You know, like asserting myself.
You cried at school.
Right.
So
hey, that fuckers, this is how I feel right now. You know, like that seemed like the right way to express myself. But as time went by the time I was 15 or 16 years old, expressing your feelings was like not on the table anymore.
There you
right.
go.
And because like if you go to school and you express your feelings to the teacher or the principal or your peer group, you know, and I'm not saying that family, obviously family is a part of this as well. But all of that stuff was stuck inside me. So I started to smoke pot and drink beer and do, you know, to escape, to do hallucinogenic drugs. And it was when I started having these experiences on things like mushrooms, acid, pot, I would start to get these physical symptoms of anxiety. I can't breathe. I think I have asthma. I think something's wrong with my heart. I think something's wrong with my stomach. You know, like those kinds of things. That was like my whole college life was anxiety or some not right with me-ness, you know,
more than
manifesting
anxiety,
physically.
More than anxiety, it sounds like panic.
Panic.
Right.
But it would be sustained. You know, a panic attack, you go, well, it'd last 5 or 6 minutes. I would have like just sustained bouts of anxiety that would last days, weeks, you know.
And you did drugs.
And I did drugs, and drinking obviously made it worse. But I remember my dad saying to me, I used to pull over on the side of the road and just think I was having a heart attack. You know, when all this was happening. And I think this was how he tried to kind of like connect with me on some of the issues that I was feeling. And he was trying to tell me, you know, this is in your mind. And I know what it's like because it was in my... Now, for him to even say that it's in his mind, you know, if he's got... Geez, I remember just like this company was such a nightmare. Like one of the buildings burned down. He wound up getting investigated by the EPA. He had all kinds of problems with it was like entrepreneur or business like turnaround horror story. And that was way more than something that was in his mind. But what was sticking in his mind was giving him these feelings like he was going to die. And he's so stoic that it's hard for me to see my dad, like even think like, oh my God, I think I'm dying, and pull over the car. Like I could never imagine that from what I've ever seen of him. So when we were young, he did a good job of kind of like protecting us from seeing these things, but it showed up in, you know, his relationship with my mother, for sure.
I protect my son sees very, very little of my anxiety, but he feels it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
You can't really hide it. It comes out in all sorts of ways, and there's just a feeling of being around someone who's anxious.
Yeah.
Right. And it's awful. And you're right. And then the stoicism is also required, certainly for fathers, but for parents generally. You got to be stoic. You have to hide these things. You can't just emote in front of your children, because then they're going to get more scared and more anxious, because then there's this uncertainty. Dad is volatile. He could do something. He could do something unexpected.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and both my parents had those moments.
How did your dad cope with it? Did he drink?
He drinks, yeah.
But not in a problematic way?
That's interesting. He would probably say...
Because you did.
Oh, yeah.
Where did you learn that? Was it from him? See, I had two good trainers, my father and my stepfather, both alcoholics.
If my dad was an alcoholic, he modeled the most responsible alcoholism. They call it functional versus, not functional. I only ever saw my dad intoxicated in his life once. I was maybe 12. It was after a pig roast, and he always tells bad jokes and then has to say that was a joke, like has to explain to people that was supposed to be a joke, but it was like a really bad joke that night. And I said, I think he's drunk, but steady, Miller Lite drinker, but never in a way that like I've never seen it cost him anything in the ways that drinking cost me, which were so immediate and catastrophic.
What do you mean? What happened? What did you do?
Just lost jobs, DWIs,
really?
Relationships. Oh, absolutely.
When did that start?
My first DWI.
Wow.
I was 18.
Wow.
It was during Christmas break my freshman year in college.
Huh.
And losing my license at that point was probably a good thing. Because if I had taken a license back to college and continued to drink the way I was drinking, sooner or later I would have crashed and killed somebody or myself.
How many DUIs have you had?
2.
Oh. I'm really lucky.
But they're both they're both off the they were so long ago that my record is basically I've had 0.
So yeah, 5 years ago when I was stealing stuff to put food on the table, I was also drinking vodka in my car in LA while driving.
Oh yeah.
And then throwing the bottle out the window on the 10 freeway.
Really?
During the day, like at 2 p.m. I'd stop teaching at college, and I'd get in my car, go right to the liquor store, and get a bottle of the cheapest vodka because I was so broke. Pop-Off. P-O-P-O-V, I believe it was called, and it was like $2. You could get like
plastic
a fifth
bottle
or something. Yep, yeah. Plastic bottle. And then I'd get a bottle of Sprite, and I would get one of those cups, like a Dixie cup or whatever, and I would combine the two, and I would just drink that while I was driving from the east side of LA to the west side of LA, which took about an hour and a half in rush hour. And then I would just toss the bottle out the window on the freeway. And by the time I got home, I was severely intoxicated. And I never got pulled over. I did that regularly. Never got a DUI. Unbelievably lucky that I didn't get a DUI, didn't go to prison, didn't kill someone, didn't kill myself.
Yeah. So my move was I would drink. I had this job. I was a teacher. It was really stressful. And I would drink every night a bottle of Jim Beam, the flask bottle, right? And then it became like the flask and a nip, the flask and 2 nips, the flask and 3 nips. And I would drink usually from I lived in a house with another guy. So I'd start drinking around the time he went to bed. And I'd drink till about 2 a.m. every night. And I'd get up at 7. I'd jump in the shower, usually throw up. And I'd go to work to teach. On the way to work, I would stop. And I would buy this new thing, Mike's Hard Lemonade, right?
Disgusting.
And Gatorade. yellow Gatorade.
Also disgusting.
And I would empty out the Gatorade, and I would pour 2 Mike's Hard Lemonades into a Gatorade
yeah,
bottle.
I did that. I made that move too.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I wouldn't drink at work, but it would make it easier for me to get through the day. There would be this comfort that as soon as work ends in my truck, there is 2 Mike's Hard Lemonades in a Gatorade bottle. Mm-hmm. And I would just do this day in and day out. Now, I was going to grad school at the same time. And this was like 7 days a week, 5 days a week of work, sleeping barely 5 hours a night, and then go to grad school on the weekends, black out or like pass out drunk every night. Mm-hmm. And I did this when I was like 23, 24, 25.
But it never got in the way of your work.
No, because eventually when I said I did it every night, I wouldn't do it every night, because eventually it would just be like I couldn't do it anymore. My body couldn't handle it anymore.
Yeah.
Eventually I just became like a binge drinker, like somebody who would have long periods of sobriety and then just slip and start drinking, usually around anxiety, usually triggered by some kind of anxious event. But through college and through some of my 20s, I would drink regularly until I couldn't do it anymore. And like when all the times I tried to get sober, I'd go to AA, and I'd hear people say, like, I drank a 5th of Jack Daniels every day for 12 years. I'm like, how are you not dead? Why'd you stop at a 5th? How does that work? How do you stop? How do you stop before you pass out? How far did you live from the store? Why couldn't you go and get more? Right? So the progression of this became so bad that I would only be able to drink in binges. Like if I picked up a drink, it could be see you in 6 days. So that's how it was for me. Mm-hmm. But obviously that involves at some point, you got to pour booze into a Gatorade bottle to get by.
Right.
But that was,
But you were functioning or high functioning throughout.
No.
Essentially.
No, in the beginning. No, when I was teaching, I was high functioning. Or I could have functioned a hell of a lot better.
Yeah.
And it was actually there was something about that period, having my own classroom that nobody in the world cared about but me. Like the administrators, I worked at this special campus on the school. I was the lead teacher, and I worked with these kids who had been sexually abused, and they'd turn around and they'd sexually abused other kids. So the campus was a mile away from the main campus of the boys' school. And it was just cast. People who had been cast aside, students who had been cast aside, most of the staff had been cast aside, and I asked for the job teaching there because I saw it as like a step on the ladder to if I can put my.
Did you always want to be a teacher? When did you want to be a teacher?
College. When I had a great history professor.
Isn't this interesting?
Yeah.
You wanted to be a teacher, and now you're an anti-teacher.
No. Why am I an anti-teacher? I'm an anti-public school teacher.
But you wanted to be a teacher, though. So you wanted to, in a sense, you replace what was there, right? You probably saw these classrooms and didn't like what was going on. And thought you could do it better.
No, it wasn't that. That was all a distant memory to me.
Oh, maybe that was just me I was talking about right there.
By the time I got to college, I didn't look back and say, oh, God, Mrs.
So why did you want to be a teacher?
I had a history professor in college. His name was Todd Breida. And I was the worst student. Because that was where the drinking really took off. We can drink every night.
Where did you go to college?
Southern Vermont College.
Southern Vermont.
A place. Okay. I think their motto was a place for kids who got C's.
Yeah,
in high school.
I think it is.
Barely accredited.
In Latin, that's their motto. Yes.
So I was on disciplinary probation.
Wait, what was his name? Todd?
Todd Breida.
What was good about him?
He had this intensity, he had this passion. He knew so much about the subject, and what ultimately wound up being good about him is that his expectations for me were so high. When no one had ever really had any expectations for me. I remember taking an aptitude test when I entered college, and they're like, "Oh, your scores are really high," and somehow I just forgot that and went back to thinking I was stupid. I had 12 years of public school momentum working against the realization that I had high aptitude tests.
No one had any expectations for you?
I don't remember anyone saying, you're better than this.
Are you talking about people in school?
People in school.
What about family? Did they have expectations for you?
I think they could have been higher.
Uh-huh.
I think my mom... I acted kind of like...
Did they think you were smart?
I think at some point they would have had to have been worried that I wasn't. Because what was the metric for being smart? Doing well in school. So yeah, I mean, elementary school, straight A's, sure.
So that was their only metric for intelligence?
No.
Grades?
No, but you have to think, though, it's a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So now...
And you got bad grades.
And I got bad... No, aced elementary school, got some Fs in 6th, failed reading.
Wow.
Didn't do assignments.
Wow.
And started to slack off, and my grades started to slip. Middle school was a C student. Early high school, not a good student.
And you became a jock, right?
Kind of. I mean, I was in that crowd. I played golf. I was on the golf team.
Golf.
I played baseball. I played hockey.
You have to be successful if you play golf.
Yeah. Well.
What a failure you were.
Indeed.
Going from the golf team to this? Come on. Sitting in my house talking about this. You had a teacher.
Yeah.
I had exactly the same experience.
Yeah.
Well, not exactly, but similar. So I went to college. No one had any expectations from me until that time. My parents, as far as I know, just never voiced any expectations at all and never said anything about my intelligence or my abilities. Certainly not in school did anyone say anything. And then I go to this college, and there's this one teacher who pays attention to me. Mm-hmm. Al Denman, philosophy professor at Antioch College. And he just watched me and listened to me and he would take my ideas and then give them back to me as something else. And then we would have this communication, and we would start to talk about ideas, and we would talk about Plato, and we would talk about Aristotle, and we would talk about Malcolm X, and we would talk about everything. There was actual communication, and he treated me like an intellectual. Mm-hmm. He treated me like an intellectual. He took my ideas seriously. It didn't mean he agreed with me necessarily, but he took them seriously. When he didn't agree with them, or he thought that they were missing something, he would let me know. He would say, well, there's actually a fact here that you're missing, or there's an idea here that you're unaware of. But it was simply treating me like a thinker, brand new. And that was the first year in college for me. That was when I decided to be a teacher. I didn't want to be a professor. I wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Because that's what he was doing. He was actually teaching me for the first time in my life.
Yeah, I remember the moment. Like you're talking about like sort of a larger experience. I remember this one flash memory where the guy was like, we were sitting in the school library, and we were working in a group. And we were outlining essays for like Western Civ finals. So it was like a study session, right? And he would come through and he would look at what my table was doing. And I remember he looked at what I had written and he said, "Wow, that's really good." He goes, "That's it. You're onto something." Mm-hmm. And I said, "Holy shit, an adult thinks I'm onto something," you know? Well, I mean, I was 19 years old. And it was like the first compliment that I ever got on the school side. Now, as I'm thinking through it a little more carefully, my parents did encourage me to pursue my interests. Right? I remember they found this sportscaster camp, sports writer and sports broadcaster camp that they sent me to. And I think they got me into. All the kids at this camp was interesting. They were like 16, 17. Some of them were older than 18. And they got me in there when I was like 12.
The problem is you're not Jewish. You have to be Jewish to be a sportscaster.
Oh, I don't think so. You have to have. I think you have to have a professional.
It's an old joke among Jews that they when they stopped being good at sports, they became sportscasters and statisticians. But anyway, no, I wanted to be a sports writer. That was my first career goal when I was in high school. I wanted to be a sports writer because I loved sports, and thought I was a pretty good writer, and so I thought, oh well, those things go together. As a sports writer, gave up on that, But
geez, aren't we peas in a pod then?
Here's the interesting thing, though.
Yeah.
You get complimented by a teacher, and instead of just saying, oh, I am smart, I'll do this or that or the other thing, you decided to jump all the way to being a teacher yourself from that moment.
It was a process, right? That was the moment where, because what I had done through like the first 5 semesters of college, so 2.5 years of college, I avoid Todd Breida like the plague, because people are walking out of his class going, oh my God, I took like 7 or 8 pages of notes today. We have a test every Friday. This guy wants so much of us. And I was like, fuck that. I don't go near anybody who expects anything out of me. I'm into drinking, and partying and trying to get laid. So that's what I'm here to do. I majored in communications because, like when I was 9, I used to go to the Red Sox games and I'd sit there and go,
here's Wade Boggs. Wade Boggs is now batting. He's the third baseman. He's 26 and number 26, and he's batting 347.
And I would sit there as a little kid, and I would do play-by-play, basically just into my hands for the game. And then, like, I went to the sportscaster camp, 12, 13 years old, and then it's like, I don't know, 1994, and it's like, time to pick a major to go to college because, you know, you're old enough and wise enough to decide what to do for the rest of your life at this point. So I said, well, you know, when I was little, I really liked this idea that I would, like, talk into a microphone and people would, like, listen to me and be interested in what I said. So I should go to college for communications. So I went to college. I learned about how they did how the communications industry worked in the 70s, because that was about how up to date my small college was. Graduated in 2000, had a worthless degree. But during that time was really inspired by this guy and this excitement that he had about history and how much he knew about the Civil War. And I said, there's something, I like this. He talks to people and they listen. Maybe this is the thing. Mm-hmm. Maybe this is the way I do it. Maybe all that, like, sports being on television, like, how the fuck do you get on television? How the fuck do you get on the radio? I should do that. I should get at the front of the room because what he does satisfies that need that I have. Mm-hmm. To engage people, to excite people, to tell them things they don't know and have them go, ooh, that's neat.
Well, guess what you're doing now?
Fuck yeah.
That's what you are doing.
Oh yeah, that's why this story is wonderful, right? Because I had to me, like, when this first occurred to me, it's like there was something aligned with who I am as a person, with my identity. That said, this is how you express yourself.
I'm not sure people know this. You have a podcast.
Hey, tell them in the intro.
And it's called, I will. It's called the School Sucks Podcast.
Right.
And it is more than weekly, but at least once a week, you talk to thousands of people.
Right.
There are very, very, very few professors in this country who talk to that many people ever. Yeah. Right. And you inspire people. You excite them. You give them new ideas. You offer them new ways to think about things. And you've been doing it for how long now?
8 years. The 8th anniversary of the show is the first day of our event is the 8th anniversary of the School Sucks podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
8 years. You've been doing 5th. A podcast for 8 years. When you started that, I had never heard of podcasts. Most people hadn't heard of podcasts. Mm-hmm. You were a pioneer. You were a teacher at that time, right?
I was at the time that I started the School Sucks podcast. I had just partnered with a guy who was a professor at King's College in New York to run an SAT tutoring business and college consulting business in Portsmouth. And we were kind of targeting it towards people who wanted to get into the Ivy Leagues, right? Like we wanted to give them a package of, like, these are the scores you need and here's what you need to know to be headed in that direction. So we aside from, like, those kinds of consulting services, the only thing we did was try to jack up their SAT scores as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Before then, you worked at a boarding school, is that right?
Yeah. I worked at a boarding school in a few different capacities from 2000 until 2004. I moved to a day school run by the same people to teach history, 2004 to 2006. Then I moved to Salem, Massachusetts in 2006 to work for another tutoring company that did all the rich overachiever types in the greater Boston area. I did that for a couple of years and then moved back up here and started this
But what
company.
was the job at the boarding school like? What was that boarding school about?
It was some of the worst memories of my career, for sure.
Why?
The boarding school is shut down today. It was shut down by the state. The people who were running it were engaging in tax fraud and embezzlement and various schemes. When I started there, I was just a residential counselor. I helped kids do, like, their laundry, walked the halls at night, helped them with routines, recreated with them, played basketball with them.
Who were the kids? Why were they there?
They were mostly kids from inner city areas, from broken homes, parents who had drug addiction, parents who had been abusive, kids who had gone through foster care and been abused, kids who were told this was their last stop before
were they
juvenile
assigned? They were
jail.
assigned there by courts, I take it.
They were assigned there by courts. Most of them were under the custody of the state. And this is where my sort of warm and fuzzy liberalism that I picked up in college, or leftism, progressivism, evaporated. Because it's like, here's what happens to people the state cares for. And what my job was within 6 months of being there, one of the functions of my job, I got med certified. So I would stand in a booth that had been built inside this building filled with drugs, and I would give kids drugs.
Like what? Which
lithium,
drugs?
Wellbutrin, Seroquel, Adderall, Ritalin. I would give kids 35 pills a day. You know, I remember this one kid, little tiny kid. He was like 10, but he was tiny. Fetal alcohol, 35 pills. 70 or 80 pound kid, not a dent in any of his behavioral issues. You know, and I would watch this. I don't want to superimpose wisdom onto myself in the moment that I didn't actually have then, but definitely in retrospect, like looking at that experience, I remember kids changing from being like thin and energetic to basically just out of shape, lethargic blobs because of some of these drugs. Give him this drug. Well, it makes him too speedy and nervous. We'll give him this drug that calms him, that gets him to, you know, sink right into the couch. And it was like this swallow the spider to catch the fly kind of thing, right? Where here's the key behavior issue that we're trying to resolve. So we give the kid this drug, but this drug produces this side effect. So for the side effect, we give the kid this drug, right? Now, what kind of, you know, caring person would put up with this? These kids were in the custody of the state. These kids were on Medicaid, right? It didn't matter. You know, what ultimately happened to them. Do they have problems? Do drugs fix the problems? Or do we at least pretend that drugs fix the problems? Give them drugs. That was it. That was the intervention. The school went through the motions of therapy, and there were some people there working in a therapeutic capacity that were very good and very caring. But that system was fucked. It haunted me after I left there. Some of the things that I had done, that not just the drugs, but like physically restraining kids.
I mean, that really is a prison. Or,
yeah. Oh, it was.
Or it's more like the old mental asylums that people were assigned to, adults were assigned to, which were closed down by the 1980s. Those were all stopped and closed down. But apparently, they continue for juveniles.
Oh, in many ways.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Right?
Because there was no...
It sounds like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest for kids.
There was no advocacy for them, right?
Yeah.
So you're right. In many ways, that did. Now, were there worse places than where I worked? Sure. I mean, we were told when they hired us, this is the toughest population of kids anywhere on the East Coast. This is where they come before they go to juvenile jail. And I'm sure juvenile jail was worse. And like I said, were there ever like things that felt good about working at this place? Absolutely. You know, we took a group of kids down south one time to, you know, fish and camp and kayak, and we had lots of there were lots of rewarding experiences while I was there, especially as a teacher. Just like really quick, like one of the things that actually got me interested in entrepreneurship or ownership of my own thing was having my own classroom shut away a mile away where nobody cared about it. So this is where I learned, like, do whatever you want. If they find out that you changed something, say, oh, I thought that was okay to do. So I ripped apart the whole curriculum that they wanted me to do. They wanted me to just teach them like normal kids. So I set up a life skills curriculum. And our project was, I kind of fake employed them all at a newspaper that was real for the school. And I gave them all these jobs, gave them fake paychecks, said they had to use the money to like learn how to buy a house or rent an apartment. And they all had jobs at the newspaper. And they produced a real product that the whole school enjoyed. Now, this kind of just was serendipitous how it came together. But I was like, I was putting in like 50, 60 hours a week. You know, I would go in to work on a Saturday and just work on like, what could we do next? Because it was mine.
Right.
It was my thing. And we did it for a whole year. And it was one of the most rewarding years of my life. And what the kid, I mean, after I left the school, it kind of just went back to the way it was. So, you know, that was a bummer. But it was like, I said, okay, so this is what it's like to actually be in charge of something and to be responsible for something, you know? and to actually take pride in something when it succeeds. I'd never had an experience like that anywhere in the work world.
So where did you get this idea for this podcast?
Okay, so around this time, I started listening to, like, I think I was probably just looking for more 9/11 conspiracy shit or something. Like once iTunes was new, because in the summer I painted, so this is where I got introduced to the world of like MP3s and audiobooks, because that's what made that job enjoyable. Painting. I actually learned most of what I know probably on a ladder. Most of what I knew when I started the show was learned on the ladder. I started to listen to people talk, and I wanted to do it. I would be up on a ladder. I would listen to people I disagreed with, and I would pause and I would go, no, here. And I'd just like have debates with them out loud on a ladder.
And these were podcasts you're listening to?
Yeah, or podcasts or like presentations. I would listen to like Real Time with Bill Maher.
Okay. These would have been like the first podcasts, right? This was when it was a brand new thing.
I think this was like between 2006 and like me leading up to me starting the show.
Pretty early.
Right.
Yeah.
So wherever I could get MP3s of, I remember listening to like Barney Frank having like a debate with somebody, and I would, be more on his side at the time. But I would just like listen and kind of stop and talk through what I was hearing, and I started to, just get this desire to do that. So I had a Mac at the time, and I would just open GarageBand, and I would just sit in this little office in my house, and I would talk about school. And I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know shit. So I just started to make this big collage of all these school problems, and I would just talk about them and then try to like organize it into.
Why did you care about school?
Because that's the world that I was immersed in. And I started to see like, okay, maybe this, like, isn't it kind of obvious that like so many of the problems in society would be at least originate, or if not be exacerbated by what's happening in the schools. And it seems that people have always understood that school is this incredible tool of control, as it just changes hands over the last 150 years, from the standardizers and the homogenizers to the socializers and the progressives, and then it winds up in the hands of the behaviorists, right, and the experimenters, like the psychological experimenters, and then it winds up in the hands of the globalizers, right. So school is always the tool. As the world needs to change, as the populace needs to be reshaped, school is always the tool that is, that people harness to use to that end.
When I say these things, a lot of times people just sort of shrug it off and say, school didn't really affect me that much.
Right. Like spanking didn't affect me
Well,
that
I don't know.
much.
I wonder. I mean, do I see imprints on my son? Do I see imprints on myself from school? I don't know. How much effect does school have on us, actually?
How would you try to gauge that? That's an interesting question, but how would you try to gauge that? I mean, because school is never, very, very few, like, I remember times when I cried, times when I felt really embarrassed, times when I was scared, times when I was uncomfortable, like things that are really, really etched in my memory. But it's pretty much just like a slow and steady kind of, messaging that you get. It's subtle, but it's consistent. Yeah. Obedience, obey, conform, submit.
It also puts boundaries around what is acceptable, right? We're trained right away. I've said this on your show before, but that's the first thing that they teach you in kindergarten, right, is how to line up.
Yeah.
And that thing there is a desk that you're supposed to sit at, not play on or under.
Yeah.
That's literally what kindergarten is. That's what teachers do. Your first time in a classroom, they train you, they teach you that there are boundaries to your behavior.
Yeah.
Right? Which start with the walls of the classroom. You can't leave this anymore, kids. You can't just walk out of this place anymore. You have to stay here during this time. The clock on the wall, that's another boundary. When the hand goes to that number, you come here and do this. When it goes to that number, you get to leave. In between, you have to stay inside here. Boundaries. It's all about that, isn't it? And it's about boundaries of ideas. Certain things are acceptable to say and think, and some things are not. What we know is acceptable to say is what's in the textbook. What's in the textbook is acceptable. What is not in the textbook is not acceptable.
So
there's that, right? And then I start thinking, like, as I warned you, and maybe you warned me before I even knew this was happening, you're becoming more conservative, Brett. Are some sense of boundary bad in life, right?
Okay.
So is this kind of just like beyond where it should be, right? Maybe it's not an all or nothing kind of thing. You know, one of the things that really excited me about reading Renegade is this injection into politics and philosophy of shame, the importance of shame. Right? No one ever talks about shame.
Yep.
Right? I feel shame. I'm afraid, and shame kind of controls my behavior in these different ways, or my desire to avoid feeling shame. But it's so ever present, and you know, and it's not just delivered through, you know, cultural conditioning or religion. It finds its way into our lives a lot. So shame can be toxic, right? There can be like a toxic shame that I actually think is the root of most addiction, right? But is there also like a kind of...
Shame made you drink?
I think it's a huge part of it.
Yeah, okay. I think so too. I mean, I think that's a part of it.
Well, even like shame could be the deeper level emotion, but that, like, a step above that would be, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough to be with this person. People are going to find out that I'm a fraud, you know? Especially, I mean, I had a hard time with that, like when the show started to build like a following.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to be found out. I'm not that smart. I shouldn't be doing this. People shouldn't be listening to me. There's those sort of self-defeating saboteur voices that pop up. Relationships. I remember I was in this relationship for years with this girl, and I was, you know, it was like the first person that I was with who had like the same ideas as me, and she was like smart and impressive, and she had a successful career, and she moved here to start a business, and you know, in my head was like, you're not good enough for this person. You're not, you know. I mean, that pops up in a lot of different ways. And my response to that was to have drinking binges, you know? Like the shame, okay, so like not only should you not be doing this show, but you shouldn't be with this girl. Your whole life is a fucking fraud. You know, now it's never like over the top, but this is like a subtle subconscious that I sort of uncovered later.
So I have heard in the public sphere over the last couple of years, a lot of pundits, journalists, public intellectuals sound as if they've been listening to me rail against shame. I doubt they actually have, but it sounds like they have. And they've made counter arguments. I've heard like Ann Coulter say this. I've heard lots of people, liberals and conservatives, by the way, say that shame is necessary because there are certain ideas and certain behaviors that are just bad, and we need to shame people. Like one thing I've heard is, you know, the success of environmentalism in the 1960s and 1970s in shaming people to stop polluting, to stop throwing garbage on the ground, was very successful. That shaming is really why we have clean parks and clean streets. We do, compared to the 1950s. People just don't do that anymore. They don't just throw garbage out of their window anymore like they used to. So the question is about means and ends, okay? So the ends are decided in advance by those authorities and those experts. We want the people to stop polluting. We want people to build a wall on the Mexican border. We want them to work hard in the factory. We want them to support our war, whatever it is. And when the people don't have the same ends in mind, then we need to use shame.
I wonder if we need a little bit more precision with the word there, because what it sounds like you're describing is guilt, and the distinction that I would make between the two, you know, even though you're certainly capable of feeling both simultaneously, shame is something that's more nebulous and internal, right? So some examples of how shame gets in us: religion, religious conditioning. You're born evil. You need God to make you good, or cult, or the sort of state conditioning.
Shame is a negative feeling about one's self, and guilt is a negative feeling about what one has done to others.
Right.
Yeah.
But
those often get combined, right? You refuse to serve in the military. That's bad for the country, but it also means you're a bad person. You're a coward. So it's about means and ends. So, you know, if you're if your objective is to accomplish something or gain something in the world, and it requires work or order or boundaries around time, around space, you have to get up at a particular time and you have to work a particular number of hours to get this thing.
Right.
Then it's just a question of how to do that. Right. And so, yeah, you're going to have to work. You're going to have to put some boundaries around yourself and around your own life to achieve that end. The problem is when your objectives differ from other people's objectives and they need to coerce you into doing the things that are necessary for their objectives. That's when the shaming starts.
Right. So that's why, like, if you have
instance,
these,
so for instance, in schools, in kindergarten, in Horace Mann's schools and John Dewey's schools, in today's schools, we need to make those 5-year-olds ready to work when they get out of those schools 12 years later.
Yeah.
They have to be ready to work and they have to be ready to serve the country. And also, we haven't even talked about this, they have to be trained to obey authority. They have to be trained to follow the laws, right?
Yeah.
So now some of those things might be good. Working isn't always bad, depending on the ends. Serving the country is not my cup of tea, but for some people it might be.
Sure.
Following rules and laws and obeying authority, yeah, again, I'm not so sure about that, but again, it may be necessary in certain circumstances. Here's the thing. All the way through, and certainly at the beginning of that process, there is no 5-year-old on Earth who wants to do any of those things.
Of course not.
So how do we get them to do it? Now, here is what happened before modern schooling. We whipped them. We beat our children to force them to do those things. And we found out by the 19th century that wasn't so effective. And so what Horace Mann and his ilk and his generation did was they said, no. It's much more effective to convince them that learning these things and following these rules and obeying authority, those things are good. And a good person does those things. And once we get the children to believe that themselves, we don't need to hit them. We don't need police. We don't need any external coercion. They will be good citizens, good workers, and good soldiers forever.
And that, I guess, was maybe, I mean, I don't know this for sure, but it seems like that was Mann's big takeaway from Prussia, because in Prussia, the success, in the infancy of psychology and psychological conditioning was getting people to internalize control, And but we do need to have control inside, self-control, self-discipline. But it's like people accepted somebody else's wishes, somebody else's diktat, somebody else's vision as their own internal control.
Yeah, it becomes their own.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, the nation. Guess what else the Prussians invented? Nationalism.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, right. And so this is not to say that all those, what became German nationalists, weren't getting anything from nationalism. Of course they were. That's why it's so successful. They gain, there's some gratification, there's some sense of fulfillment, there's
belonging.
This belonging, identification with a greater thing than themselves.
Right.
That makes it so successful, and in Germany, especially successful, right?
Oh, yeah.
Nationalism? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but that's what happened. They convinced people, and it wasn't a conspiracy, it was just sort of an understanding of how people often operate, is that if you can get them to internalize this thing and to get something from it, same with religion, right? Religion isn't just imposed on people. People get something from it, and that's why they follow religion. That's why they identify with that God or that religious figure, and that's why they follow the rules set forth by the religion. That's what was done by the inventors of the public school system. That's what they've been trying to do, I should say. And that was really Dewey's big turn when he comes along in the turn of the 20th century. He says, we've really got to do this. We've got to have he called it a democratic classroom. And nowadays, when people look at John Dewey talking about the democratic classroom, they all stand up and cheer and they think that's wonderful. And I say, wait a minute, let's think about this again. What Dewey wanted, and he said this, was for them to participate in their own self-disciplining.
Right. So it's democracy as in the voice of the people once the thoughts that control that voice have been properly programmed.
And he was really clear about this, too. This was at the time of World War I, and he wanted the United States to enter World War I. And he said, the reason I think it would be great for the United States to enter World War I, the Great War, as it was called then, is that it will force our society to become well-ordered and scientifically managed. We will eliminate alcohol, which was a big issue then. We will have prohibition, which he wanted. We will have public control of major industries. We will have much of society organized like a factory, because guess what? During a war, societies are forced to organize themselves like factories in order to win the war.
Right.
You've got to regiment people. And Dewey, again, this is why I love him, perversely, but he was very open about this and unashamed about it. He said, that's why war is good. He called it the social possibilities of war. Very famous essay he wrote. Mm-hmm. But this was all tied back in for him to his theory of education and what he called the democratic classroom. If you get people to participate in all of this and gain something from it and feel like it belongs to them, give them ownership, a sense of ownership over the nation, over the classroom, over their lives, then the whole thing just operates independently. It just moves forward. It churns forward like a locomotive, the locomotive of history. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to whip them, flog them, or even shame them anymore. They will shame themselves, and they will march off into that war on their own.
It's like self-perpetuating. It's like very utilitarian.
It certainly is.
Yeah. Wow.
It's like gravity.
Yeah.
You just set up the wheel on top of the hill, and it just goes. The people will propel themselves forward. And this is what we got mostly, right? Most of us, as we said already, most Americans don't ever think that there's anything wrong with the idea of school. They certainly have some issues specifically with how schools are managed. Mm-hmm. But again, hardly anyone in our society questions that there should be a compulsory school system, that children should be forced to go to those boxes from 7 to 3 every single day.
Absolutely.
Right?
Imagine asking any of those people what would happen if that system was just gone?
Right.
A thought experiment we did earlier. That's like societal collapse. It is societal collapse. That's not just a fear. Mm-hmm. That is, wow, John Dewey.
That's what he did.
I mean, that is sort of
that's what he did.
The nucleus.
Yeah.
That's the axle
but he said,
that turns that wheel.
He said we have to make it democratic, meaning we got to stop beating the kids. And by the way, they beat the living shit out of children. This is in my book.
Yeah.
In every country in the West, in the world, until the 19th century, until the late 19th century, they beat the shit out of children in schools and all the time, basically, to make them do certain things. And he said, wait, that's just counterproductive for our own purposes. If we're going to have a functioning nation state and a successful, powerful nation state, we have to actually let them manage the classroom, give them ownership.
Yeah, it's an end run around resentment.
So instead of whipping them,
we
need to say, oh, no, this is your classroom, kids. You get to participate. Mm-hmm. They don't really get to run it, but they get to participate, feel like they participate, and get something from that. The problem he encountered, and progressives and all of his descendants since then have encountered, is that, thank God, a whole lot of kids over the last 100 years haven't been into it. They haven't bought into it. They haven't internalized this thing. They haven't felt like that classroom belonged to them in any way. They continued to rebel like I did in first grade when I pulled that bookshelf down onto Mrs. Fishleader's head, because I never felt like it belonged to me. It sounds like you never felt like it belonged to you either.
No.
And we know that there are many, many, many public schools all across this country where most of the kids don't feel like it belongs to them whatsoever, and all they are doing is passing time, waiting to get out of there. So there's this constant, what I call, I call it the everyday jailbreak. Mm-hmm. There's an everyday jailbreak going on in every public school as we speak, including in Beverly Hills. It's not just in Compton. It's every public school. There's an everyday jailbreak going on. I know my son does it all the time.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Which is simply psychological. They just haven't internalized that discipline that John Dewey wanted them to have. They simply haven't merged their identity with that school, with that classroom, with the teacher, with the nation. They just don't do it. None of this is conscious, right? They don't sit there and think, oh, I'm rebelling against these ideas and against the nation, against natural. John Dewey. They just don't do it. They just don't internalize it. They think about video games or about the girl in the seat next to them or about getting high after school. They don't give a shit about that place they're in. And that is where freedom is.
But unfortunately, the problem, I don't disagree with what you said, but the problem is because this vision that John Dewey that you're describing, it doesn't match any of our experience because of those kids that
because of
those kids that you're talking about. So at every turn,
no, there are some Deweyan kids.
No, of course there are. Of course there are.
Yeah.
But at every turn where these rebellions happen, the school cracks down.
Yeah.
Right. So now we have something like Dewey's vision of school is incredibly benign compared to what we actually have.
No.
Today.
No, I prefer the ones where there's just rebellion and they have cops, literal actual cops. Right.
Do you think that's
So I used to live near Venice High School, and
Yeah.
anybody who knows Venice High School, anytime you drive by it, there's cop cars outside in front of. There's a cop car that's assigned to Venice High School.
Yeah,
It's there all day long, and they have metal detectors and all that stuff, right? And that's sort of standard for a lot of so-called inner city schools. Nah, I kind of prefer that. Because not that I would want to be there, but that's where there is any sort of individual freedom.
You think that's the
Or
sign of progress?
It's a sign of resistance to progress, progressive progress.
Finger quotes.
Yeah. Again, I have nothing but sympathy for the kids in those schools. I do think they're prisons. I think they're awful. But for society at large, it's sort of like a counterweight. It's the one alternative to the system that John Dewey and the progressives wanted to impose on us. Not impose on us, wanted us to buy into. Those kids simply don't buy into it. That's the underclass. That's the renegades. Those are the people in my book. But they exist in every classroom as we speak, and not just in Venice High School, not just in Compton High School. I think they're everywhere in every classroom all day long.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, it's not that we need to celebrate that and think, it's wonderful, just to identify that there is this resistance to that project. It's always there. It's always going on. There's always a tension. They would love it, right? Imagine that. As you're a teacher in one of those schools, you got 35 kids, you make $50,000 a year, maybe. Imagine being in this inner city high school. You're this brand new teacher. Imagine if all of them were Deweyan, disciples, that they just were there to, they are going to teach themselves what's in this textbook because this is really important. And I'm going to make myself into a good citizen, and I'm going to read this book, and I'm going to learn the rules of this society, and then I'm going to contribute to that society as soon as I get out of here.
You know what's fucked up?
Right? You wouldn't even need a teacher.
When I left the school that I worked at between 2004 and 2006, where I was teaching history, and I moved to this rich area of Massachusetts, Dover, Massachusetts. That was where the company was headquartered. There's a statue of Horace Mann in that town. It's interesting. That was the population of kids. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, like knowing that feeling that something was wrong, right? But I remember thinking to myself, holy shit, this is so much better than the shit that I had been dealing with. Kids running away, skipping school, coming in high, coming in drunk.
As a teacher, it was much better.
It was right?
Yeah, right.
So now it's interesting because it takes me back to like the first question that you asked, right? About the prison guard, being the prison guard.
There you go.
Because look at what I had internalized. Look at what my attitude was. Now this was 2006. I started doing this work. I thought I was pretty aware. Like back then, if you had asked me, how aware are you on a scale of 1 to 10? I probably would have said 9 or 10. I didn't know anything because I looked at the experience that I had as a teacher from 2004 to 2006, and now this new experience that I was having with the perfect Dewey disciples. And I said, this is where it's at.
You want the prisoners to guard themselves.
This
of course
is
you do.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that there was I was working at Needham High School. There was 3 suicides there in a month. Kids, high school kids.
What kind of high school is that? What's the
super ritzy,
yeah,
best,
okay. Right.
25, 30,000 a student probably.
The suicides, well, who knows? But, we certainly know that there are kids in schools like that where there are a lot of Deweyans. There are a lot of kids who have internalized this stuff and think it's great. Love their high school. Love their high school. It's the kids who wear the school colors. That's who we're talking about, proudly. But there's always going to be dissidents or kids who are just alienated from that, who just don't feel a part of this. They just don't. It's just not theirs. It's just not theirs for whatever reason. This school doesn't belong to them. They don't want it to belong to them. They don't want it to be a part of it. So the alienation, the loneliness, the feeling weird, right? That's the cost of that.
They were the only kids who were ever any fun, you know?
Well, yeah.
Like I liked the Dewey Disciples in Needham, Massachusetts, because I could go on autopilot.
They're easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But all the times that I had fun at school, like, was it fun to go and teach a class of 12 perfectly behaved 16-year-olds the SAT and make $1,000 in 8 hours? Yeah, it seems fun after the fact. But the real times, like where I laughed, where you know, like the memories of having fun at school as a teacher were made, were with, you know, the most ridiculous kids as far as like what was acceptable in the school was concerned.
How many stand-up comedians would we have if Dewey were fully successful?
0. Well, fully successful. Yeah, I would say 0.
Fully successful. If
Yeah.
we had had the society that he wanted to create, how many rock and roll musicians would we have? Would we even have rock and roll?
How does that make you feel about Dewey?
Of course not.
Like, what's your feeling? Like, you try not to do enemy imagery, but like when you ask those rhetorical questions, like what do you feel for Dewey?
I'm glad that he mostly failed.
Sure.
That's all.
You don't feel anything towards him personally?
No. It's really important not to moralize about these people. I don't think he's evil. I don't think he was bad. I don't think he was wrong in any way. He had different values. See, this is the thing people don't understand. There's values, right? This is what we want in the world as individuals. Okay, to me, that's autonomous. Whatever you want in the world, that's up to you entirely. I have nothing to say about that. I have no judgment about it. That is for you to decide entirely. Okay,
sure.
Moralizing about things is different. It's when you try to impose your own values on others, either through shame or guilt or through state power. Doesn't matter. It's when you start to say, you should have my values. You should do this. You should think in this way. That's different. So all I'm interested in doing is keeping people with different values away from me and keeping them from having any power over me. And that, again, could be cultural or it could be legal. And in fact, the cultural power is definitely more important, usually. And the second thing I want to do is find people who have my values or similar values, who share some of my values, and we'll get together and do things that create a world in which our values are better met.
So our missions are well aligned in that respect.
Yeah,
I talked about
precisely.
like not caring about what happens to the public school bureaucracy.
You want to find
People have tried to talk to me about it. I've walked away.
You want to
from it.
find friends and allies,
Exactly.
who have a similar vision, who just value similar things. You want more people, right? You want more kids wandering in the woods, exploring it. You want more people just asking questions, not interested in just, you know, following the rules and solving the problems that are already set out by the authorities. You want more people, right, who just wander, who explore, who are open, who are curious. That can't happen in a school. No. Because a school has a mission. The school has an objective. It has to meet specific objectives. It has to move, right? Every kid in a school has to be moved from A to B. It's not yours in your school, Brett Veinotte school. You start with A, but there is no B.
Brett Veinotte's learning environment.
Yeah. Right? Am I right?
Yeah.
There is no B.
Not necessarily. Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
how fundamentally different is that, right? So you just want a world in which there are more people who have no B, who just start somewhere and then go wherever their mind takes them.
right. But see, also getting that experience, like I was talking about this 8-year-old boy that I worked with, where there can be some fortification at a young age where you become more impervious to other people trying to shame you and scold you.
That's
and
important.
use those things to control you.
Yep. Really important.
You know?
It's really important to be impervious to shame, or at least to be, impervious to it. And you know what I'm thinking of right now? I'm thinking of alcoholism, because one of the things that you learn when you go through sobriety, especially if you go through, you know, most of the programs, and I have mixed feelings about the 12-step programs and all that stuff, but the one thing that I saw when I was in AA and when I was around so-called recovering alcoholics. I even have an issue with the very definition of alcoholism.
We would agree on
but
all
whatever.
that. Yeah,
Read my book. I cover this. It was invented by Benjamin Rush during the American Revolution.
Oh, geez.
Yes.
He's still on the APA seal, I think, Benjamin Rush.
What's that?
American Psychological.
Oh, yeah. He invented this idea that alcoholism is a disease, and the idea, if it's a disease, it's permanent, it's a condition, and therefore the only cure for it is lifelong abstinence. Mm-hmm. Okay, that was all invented by this dude named Benjamin Rush, who didn't even have a microscope. He just thought of it, and that ever since then we've all believed that. Nonetheless,
it's interesting because my experiments have led me to the same conclusion.
Yeah, well, he might have been right, but
Yeah.
if he was, it was just good guessing. Anyway, nonetheless, in my experience, I've been sober for 5 years, and I started to hang around so-called recovering alcoholics, people who weren't drinking anymore. And what I found was very consistently, and if you go to any AA meeting, you'll see this right away. I'm sure you can speak to this. People are shameless in the best way. They talk about the most painful things in their lives. They talk about things they did that are just awful by anyone's measure, but they are comfortable talking about those things. Like on this podcast, people talk about things they've never said before in public.
Right.
I think you probably have already.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure.
But in my experience, the drunks and the junkies, the ex-drunks and the ex-junkies are the most able to do that, the most comfortable with that. And so in a way, it's going to be harder to shame those people to do stuff. I don't know where this goes. I've just noticed that there's this whole population of people who are very impervious to shame, and that they tend to be the ones who have gone to the bottom.
Yeah.
In the drunk world, we talk about the bottom, and how bad was your bottom?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And being afraid of that shame is what keeps people there, I think. Or needing to, feeling the shame and then needing to cover up the shame. Shame traps people in that place. And I think that, confronting the shame, whether it's through, AA or NA or, some other mode of group recovery program. Like I'm not a big believer in AA.
Why not?
I really was turned off by the religious aspect of it. And they said, it's not religious, but it is.
Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. I don't really care one way or the other, but in my experience, there are different AA groups. Some of them, the higher power that they talk about is clearly the Christian God, and in some groups it clearly wasn't. In fact, I went to a lot of AA meetings that were atheist, in fact.
Sure. And I think that's great.
The thing that I really liked in those groups was that they defined the higher power as those people sitting in that room with you.
Right.
Who were experiencing this together, who were willing to listen to your stories about throwing vodka bottles out of a car.
Yeah.
And not shame you, right?
So I think,
because guess why? Because they had exactly the same experience, or they did something even worse.
Right, and that was, I think, one of the benefits of going to those kind of meetings. And if people are kind of struggling with this, I mean, through most of my drinking, it's like you can either go to AA or you can die of alcoholism. That was sort of the choice that I was presented with. And I mean, I originally stopped trying to quit drinking when I was 21. I think I made it happen when I was 35, 36.
So it's been how long now?
2.5 years. But I mean, like, if I didn't have like long periods of sobriety throughout my 20s, throughout most of I've spent most of my life since I was 21 sober. I was always like a binge drinker. After I got through that period up to leaving that teaching job where I talked about drinking Jim Beam and going into work with the Gatorade bottle in my car, that was the end of my regular drinking. That it was from that point on, I knew that this would only be a problem, and drinking would only pop up again in times of great stress, in times of me ignoring things I need to be paying attention to about myself. Shame, anxiety, all of those things, just kind of letting my guard down, not spending enough time with sober people, not doing what you're saying, not talking about
not just those issues and those actions, but those feelings that create those actions, or those feelings that are, lead up to those reactions with other people who knew what that was like, wherever I found them.
Yeah, if you own what you did, no one can shame you for it.
Right.
If you state things publicly, then there's nothing they can do to you. They can't shame you anymore. Right. If you say, yeah, I'm an alcoholic, yeah, I'm gay, yeah, whatever it is, they have no power anymore, right? Okay, so you wanted to be a teacher. You became a teacher. You found out it was not what it was cracked up to be. In fact, it was sort of like a dungeon in a sense. But you did sort of have ideas about how it could be reshaped. You leave the teaching profession. You start to listen to these MP3s in which people are just talking to each other. And then you start to think, hey, maybe I could do something like that, right? Yeah. So you start this podcast called School Sucks.
I started talking into a computer, into GarageBand files. Then I would burn them to CDs and play them for myself in my car. This is like 2006, 2007. And I would listen to them, and then I would start trying to think about how could this become like a documentary film? So I wrote a treatment for like a 3-4 page treatment once I kind of organized it into acts, like these 3 acts of this School Sucks story. What are the hidden lessons of school? Why are they there? What do we do about it?
Okay, so this wasn't about you. It was about school.
Yeah.
This was purely political.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the beginning, it was. So I took it to one of my dad's relatives who was a television producer. And we had talked about school. We had talked about Jonathan Kozol at like a wake one night for some old family member. And he goes, this is really interesting. I think about school all the time. And I read Jonathan Kozol, Shame of a Nation.
John, just for people know, Jonathan Kozol's big argument, right, is that the problem with the school system is that there's an inequitable distribution of funds.
Yeah,
that wealthy neighborhoods and communities fund their public schools very well, and so therefore their schools are nice, and the poor communities don't fund their schools very. Right. What he wants is, I think, a national or statewide redistribution of funds for schools so that they're all equal.
Indeed.
Which would solve all the problems.
Right.
Yeah.
So at this time that I'm writing the treatment, I'm starting to embrace like libertarian anarcho-capitalist ideas. And this was actually the thing that sort of centered the school problem for me, is like, all of these problems, this is all because of coercion. This is all because of compulsion. So instead of having this collage that I'd been making, it started to turn into this mind map with this idea of compulsion and coercion at the center, right? Like that's what makes this possible. People point guns at you. But I was still not wise enough to understand that not all school criticism was like, yeah, let's hold hands and criticize the schools. My criticism of school is not the same as Jonathan Kozol's criticism of school. It's almost like opposite.
The opposite.
So this guy, who I think I'm simpatico with, Glenn, the television producer, is a big Jonathan Kozol. So I said, this guy hates school too. And I give him my treatment. And he goes, this isn't good and no one would understand it. And if you want to be a documentary filmmaker, you should watch more Michael Moore movies and try to do what he does. Right? So that was where School Sucks died. And
or was given birth, right?
Well, as the podcast, yeah. So I got into this podcast. A friend of mine, really good friend of mine today, Wes Bertrand, who you had an argument with about objectivity versus relativism a couple of years ago. And he did this podcast called Complete Liberty. And I started listening to it. And this was like the 3rd or 4th libertarian podcast that I had tried out. And I was like, God, I really like this guy. You know, he explains things well. He's got a nice presentation style. So I sent him an email and I said, how could I like audition to be a guest or a co-host on your show? He's like, no audition needed, man. Just come on. And I was like, wow, this is easy access. So I said, I'd like to talk about school. I used to be a teacher. So we agreed to do an hour. We wound up doing like a 6-part series at the end of 2008, beginning of 2009. And then he had me on kind of as a regular. And it was just this, I was hooked. I said, this is what I want to do. Now, I don't know if it was for the right reasons. It was very like sort of trying to stake out this high ground of moral and intellectual superiority, and probably shaming down at anyone who didn't think that way. So it was satisfying some kind of a need for me.
Or shaming up. Right?
Yeah.
You're shaming
down morally and intellectually.
You're shaming the establishment.
Shaming up power-wise. Yeah.
So you've been questioning schools and schooling for 8 years now on your podcast.
Yeah. I would say since about 1984, but
okay. Oh, well, yeah, but I mean
since second grade
in your podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, 8 years.
And you had this job when you started it, right? Tutoring.
Yeah.
Sort of part of the establishment, right? Training kids to get into the Ivy League. You started doing this podcast, and people started listening to it. You started getting guests on it who were interesting, and you started getting more people to listen to it. And after a few years, you got so many people listening to it and contributing money to it that you were able to quit your job.
Oh, I had to go and live in a hovel to do it.
You ain't rich from it, but you were able to liberate yourself.
I don't live in the hovel anymore, right?
No.
But yeah.
This is what you do now. This is all you do now.
Yeah.
You do the podcast. Look at what you've done, man. Think about it.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. Okay.
Thank you.
No, look, you started with what's called, you had no platform. We call it this a platform in media. You either have a book, or you're a professor, or you're a former government official or something, right?
Right.
Then you can go do your media thing. You can have a radio show or a TV show or whatever. You had nothing. You were nobody, frankly, right? In that world, you were nobody.
Sure.
You just started talking into a microphone. And because of technology, there was a way for that to be distributed, right? But people had to be interested in it for it to become distributed. And so many people did, and then gave you money, just donated money, essentially. I mean, I know you're giving them stuff, but it's basically just more podcast when I give you enough money to quit your job. And this is what you do now.
It is.
Now, here's what you've been able to liberate yourself from the very world that you criticize, the world of schooling, right? You no longer have to work there. And you've created many, many more people who share your values, who want to just walk in the woods.
Or help them see it for themselves. Help them maybe like through the wisdom that I've gained and been able to communicate, help them like identify what those feelings were.
To even think that one can just walk in the woods when one is a child.
Yeah.
That's a radical idea that you put out there that thousands of people subscribe to, literally and philosophically.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty good, man. That's a win-win-win. And you're sober.
Yep.
There you go. We did it. I don't think you're conservative at all. This was the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. If you like what you heard and want to keep this show going, please go to unregisteredlisteners.com and become a subscriber. If you would like to attend the upcoming special weekend event in Salem, Massachusetts, please go to thaddeusrussell.com/courses. Thanks for listening.